Hello everyone, I know you are going to use this video for falling asleep, so before that, like this video, subscribe to the channel and let me know where you are from. Also, what time is it? It started with a scream. Not the kind of scream you hear in a haunted house ride or a horror movie marathon. No, this was raw, piercing, full of terror so real it cut through bone. It came from deep inside the woods that stood behind Carter Hill. A sound so sharp that the birds took flight, the trees went still, and even the wind seemed to hold its breath. For the residents of the sleepy town of Blackridge Hollow, that scream would become legend. But for those who knew the truth, it was only the beginning. Because something had awakened on Carter Hill, something ancient, angry, and hungry. The house had stood at the end of the gravel road for nearly 90 years. Locals whispered about it, kids dared each other to get close, and some swore they saw faces peeking from its broken windows late at night. But no one stayed long. Not since the Holbrook family vanished without a trace in 1987. Their disappearance had never been solved. Their car was found in the driveway, dinner on the table, lights still flickering, but the family gone. Now, 3 decades later, that house was no longer empty. Ethan Caldwell was the kind of guy who didn't believe in ghosts, monsters, or curses. He'd grown up in big cities, surrounded by concrete and a noise, and spent more time behind a camera than out in the wild. But after the death of his estranged uncle, an uncle he barely remembered, Ethan inherited something unexpected: the Holbrook property on Carter Hill. A house most folks in town believed should have been bulldozed, not passed down. But Ethan didn't care about town gossip. He saw opportunity. A creepy old house tucked away in a forgotten corner of upstate New York. That was YouTube gold. He was already imagining the titles: Spending the Night in a Haunted House Alone, or Exploring My Uncle's Creepy, Abandoned Mansion. Views would spike. Subscribers would pour in. And besides, the will stipulated he had to spend 30 days on the property before selling it. How hard could it be? He arrived on the 1st of October. Autumn had set Blackridge Hollow ablaze in red and gold, but Carter Hill was different. The trees here clung to their dead leaves, and a gray mist seemed to coil through the branches like fingers. The road leading to the house was overgrown. Tire tracks swallowed by moss and dirt. His car groaned in protest with every bump. When the house came into view, Ethan stopped the car. He wasn't sure what he expected. A crumbling wreck, maybe. But this place... It looked like it had been caught in a moment of rot and left there, suspended. The wood siding was cracked, paint peeling, and the windows were caked in grime. Yet it stood tall and oddly proud, its blackened roof cutting a jagged shape against the sky. He opened the front door with a rusty key and stepped into a world that hadn't changed in decades. Dust thick enough to choke on, furniture covered in moth-eaten sheets, wallpaper curling like burnt paper, and the smell, musty and bitter, like something rotting beneath the floorboards. Still, he filmed everything. Every creak of the wood, every cobweb, draped corner, every faded photo left behind. His viewers would eat this up, but something was off. There were no animal droppings, no signs of squatters, and worse, no insects, not a single fly or spider. It was as if even nature avoided this place. The first night passed quietly. Ethan set up camp in what had once been the living room. He kept the camera rolling as he told ghost stories to no one, laughing at his own jokes. Around 2 a.m., he heard it, a soft thud from upstairs. He froze, staring at the ceiling. Probably just the house settling, he muttered into the lens, trying to smile. But the thud came again. Then footsteps. Slow, deliberate, heavy. Ethan stood up, holding his flashlight like a weapon. Okay, if someone's up there, this isn't funny. Silence. Then, tap, 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 on the upstairs window pane. He crept up the stairs, each step screaming under his weight. At the top, the hallway stretched ahead like a tunnel. Rooms on either side, all of them dark. Another tap, 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 this time louder. Closer. He reached the end of the hall. The door to the master bedroom was open a crack. The tapping stopped. Heart pounding, Ethan pushed the door open. Empty. He swept his flashlight across the room. The bed was still made. A dresser sat crooked against the far wall. And the window, the one he'd heard the tapping from, was shut tight. No branches near it, no loose shutters, nothing. He exhaled, then turned to leave. That's when he saw it. A handprint. On the inside of the window, small, child-sized, pressed against the glass from the inside. He didn't sleep that night. The next morning, he went into town. Locals stared at him like he was a walking corpse. When he mentioned Carter Hill, the stares turned to glares. Place is cursed, muttered an old man outside the gas station. You shouldn't be there, a grocery clerk warned, not meeting his eyes. You won't last the month. But no one would say why. And Ethan didn't ask again. Back at the house, he checked the footage from the night before. The camera had cut out for 23 minutes. Right around the time he heard the footsteps. When it resumed, the lens was focused on his sleeping bag, and Ethan wasn't in it. He didn't remember leaving. Had he sleepwalked? Maybe it was just a glitch. He convinced himself of that, until the scratching started. That night, around 1:45 a.m., a soft scrape echoed from the kitchen downstairs. Then another, and another, like something dragging its nails across the tile. He stayed still, holding his breath. Scrape, scrape, scrape. He turned on his flashlight and tiptoed to the top of the stairs. The kitchen door was slightly ajar, and beyond it, pitch black. He called out, "Hello?" No answer. He made his way down, slow and cautious. When he reached the kitchen, he paused. The scraping had stopped. The flashlight flicked. Once, twice. Then steadied. The kitchen was empty. But the back door was wide open. Cold air drifted in, carrying with it the scent of wet earth and something else. Something metallic. Blood. He followed the scent outside, camera now gripped tightly in his other hand. The backyard stretched into the woods, and just beyond the edge of the trees, he saw it. A trail, freshly dug earth, about 6 feet long, 2 feet wide. A shallow grave. He ran. The next day, Ethan didn't film. He didn't explore. He barely ate. He stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house had gone quiet again, but that only made things worse. On the 4th night, he woke up to find someone had moved his gear. The camera was gone, his laptop unplugged, and the front door locked from the outside. That was impossible. Then he heard the voice, faint, childlike, singing, "Ring around the rosy." He backed away from the door, blood draining from his face, pocket full of posies. The voice was closer, beneath the floorboards. Ashes, ashes. He fell to his knees, pressing his ear to the wood. We all fall. Being. Something slammed into the underside of the floor. Ethan screamed. He ran outside barefoot, heart hammering, breath ragged. But the road was gone, swallowed by fog. The trees loomed closer than before, crowding the house. He was trapped. He tried to leave the next morning, packed his bag, grabbed his keys, and drove. But the road twisted, looped, and dropped him back at the same place. No matter which way he turned, he always ended up back at the house. By the 6th day, Ethan had stopped talking to the camera. By the 7th, he'd stopped filming altogether. And on the 8th day, something knocked on his door. 3 slow knocks. He didn't answer. Then a whisper from the keyhole. "Let me in." He didn't sleep that night either. Not long after, he started seeing them. Shadows just beyond the windows. Faces in mirrors that weren't his own. The house began to change. Rooms stretched into endless corridors. Doors led to brick walls. The fireplace blood soot and ash without fire. And the worst part, he wasn't alone anymore. On the 10th night, he found a note on his pillow, scrawled in red ink. Or was it blood? "You're not the first. You won't be the last." He burned it, but another appeared the next night. "It lives below. And now, so do you." He tried digging up the backyard grave, but it was empty. The only thing he found was a doll, porcelain, cracked, with one eye missing. He left it on the porch. It was back in his bed the next morning, and still the townspeople said nothing. Still, the fog thickened. Still, the house waited, because Ethan Caldwell thought he was here to make a video. But Carter Hill had other plans. And now that the house had tasted fear again, it was awake. The scratching returned on the 11th night, only this time, it didn't come from the floorboards. It came from inside the walls. It started just after midnight, faint at first, like mice skittering behind plaster. Ethan had been lying on the couch, bundled in every blanket he could find, the cold creeping deeper every night. The house didn't seem to recognize insulation, or maybe it just liked watching him freeze. The scratching grew louder, angrier. He sat up, flashlight in hand, and pointed it toward the far wall. The light flickered again, like it always did now when something approached. But this wasn't just a noise. Something was moving. The wall itself pulsed, subtly, rhythmically, as if something alive was breathing behind it. He got to his feet and stepped closer, ears tuned to the sound. It wasn't random. It had a pattern. A slow drag, a pause, then a rapid flutter. Over and over. He pressed his ear to the wall. For a moment, nothing. Then, help me. The voice was wet, gurgled, like someone drowning behind the plaster. Ethan stumbled back, flashlight shaking in his grip. He stared at the wall, half expecting it to burst open and pour out the source of that voice. But it stayed still, mocking him with its silence. He wanted to scream, wanted to run, but there was nowhere to go. He checked the footage again the next morning. 37 minutes were gone. Not corrupted, not frozen, just missing. He stared at the gap in the timeline on his camera like it might suddenly explain itself. But it never did. His own voice was heard moments after the blackout, saying something in a tone he didn't recognize. Calm, robotic, empty. Don't open the cellar. The problem was he never remembered saying that. He never remembered even finding a cellar. But the house did, and it didn't like secrets being ignored. Later that day, he heard a noise beneath the stairs. A single, hollow knock. It happened again at dusk, then again after dinner. He moved the old, broken bench that had always sat there and noticed a sliver of floor that didn't match the rest. A trapdoor. He hadn't seen it before, not once. Even though he passed that hall every day, it blended in so perfectly, like the house had hidden it until now. He stared at it for a long time, heart pounding. The voice had warned him, don't open the cellar. But curiosity sank its teeth deep into it. What was worse? The terror of the unknown, or the agony of imagining what it could be? He knelt down, pried the edges with a crowbar, and slowly pulled the door open. A blast of cold air rushed out, not stale, not musty like he expected, but fresh, wet. It smelled like the ocean. That made no sense. Blackridge Hollow was landlocked. He held the flashlight over the hole and aimed it down. The beam revealed old wooden steps, rotted in places, leading into pitch black. And just as he leaned forward to look further, a hand reached up and grabbed his wrist. Ethan screamed and fell back, heart crashing against his ribs. The flashlight clattered down the stairs, spinning wildly, throwing twisted shadows across the walls until it landed with a dull clink and died. The cellar door slammed shut by itself. He didn't sleep that night either. He tried to leave again the next morning, this time on foot. He followed the main road for nearly 3 hours. Every time he thought he saw something familiar. An old barn, a rusted sign, a fallen log. He changed direction, made turns he knew he hadn't before. But still, when the fog thinned and the air shifted, there it was again. The house. The place was bending reality now, shaping the world around him. He was the rat in its maze. But it didn't want him to die, not yet. It wanted him to stay. He stayed outside until nightfall, sitting at the edge of the woods, too scared to go in, too hopeless to go anywhere else. That's when he saw the lights, flickering in the second-story window. Candlelight. He hadn't lit any candles. Through the glass, A figure stood watching him. Pale, thin, eyes black as ink. It didn't move, didn't blink, just stared. Ethan blinked, and it was gone. But now he was sure of something. He wasn't alone in that house. That night, he explored the second floor again, searching for proof of what he'd seen. The air was colder up here, stale and heavy like a coffin sealed too long. He passed bedroom after bedroom, each more decayed than the last, until he came to a door he didn't recognize. One that hadn't been there before. It was made of black wood, scorched at the edges, the doorknob made of bone. He opened it. The room beyond was untouched, clean, pristine. The bed was made, the curtains drawn. A child's toys sat neatly on the floor. A small desk in the corner held a diary, its cover embroidered with the name Leela. He flipped it open. The first entry was dated September 3rd, 1987. We moved into the house today. Mommy says it's a new beginning. But I don't like it. I saw a man in my closet. Daddy says it's just dreams. But he touched my hand while I slept. Ethan flipped through the pages. Each entry grew darker. Mentions of the whispering man, of the lady with no mouth, of the hole in the floor that watches me. Then, on the final page, he said if I told anyone, he'd take Daddy next, so I didn't. But Daddy's gone now, and Mommy won't wake up. He's coming for me tonight. If anyone finds this, please help me. He doesn't like the light. Please help me. Please. The rest was scribbled out violently, torn. Blood soaked through the bottom of the page. He slammed the book shut. From behind the curtains, a slow creak echoed. Soft, deliberate. Something was behind them. He backed away. The curtains fluttered. A small, white hand peeked out. Then the rest of her followed. She looked no older than 8, pale, bruised. Wearing a nightgown soaked in something dark. Her eyes were glassy, empty, her mouth open. And instead of a voice, a low gurgling came out. Ethan turned and ran. He didn't stop until he locked himself in the kitchen, panting, hands shaking. The next morning, the diary was gone. But every mirror in the house now had a single sentence written in condensation. He watches you from the walls. And the scratches had grown louder. He started hearing laughter in the vents. Toys moving across the floor at night. Once, he found the bathtub filled with black water. Floating in it, Lila's doll, grinning, eyes wide open. But the worst came on the 13th day. He woke to find the living room walls covered in faces, dozens of them, pressed beneath the wallpaper, eyes bulging, mouths agape, as if people had been buried alive inside them. Some screamed in frozen silence. Others simply watched. He reached out to touch one. The face moved. Its eyes rolled toward him. Its lips parted. "Join us," it rasped. Ethan screamed and fell back, the wallpaper tearing under his weight. A dead hand fell out of the wall, real, cold, limp. He scrambled to his feet and ran for the door. Locked. Of course it was. Then the lights cut out. Darkness swallowed everything. And in that suffocating black, he heard them. Footsteps above. Whispers behind. Scratching inside the walls. And one voice, louder than the rest, rising from the floorboards, from the cellar, from deep below the earth itself. 14 more nights. Then the house is yours. Ethan collapsed, sobbing, because now he knew the truth. He couldn't leave. He couldn't run. This house didn't just trap him. It was claiming him. And worst of all, he was starting to feel it work. Something was changing in him. He hadn't blinked in 3 days. He hadn't needed food. He no longer felt the cold. Something else was keeping him alive, and the house was watching. Always watching. The 14th night began with silence. Not the peaceful kind, but a suffocating, unnatural stillness that wrapped itself around Ethan like a burial shroud. No wind. No distant creaks. No sounds from the woods. Even the floorboards refused to groan beneath his steps. The air inside the house was stagnant, thick like oil, and it pressed against his skin, as if the walls were leaning in to listen to every breath he took. Ethan had stopped questioning whether he was awake or dreaming, whether the house had changed, or if he had. There was no difference anymore. Day and night blurred into one endless smear of dread. But tonight was worse. He noticed it first in the shadows. They no longer matched the objects that cast them. A lamp's silhouette on the wall twisted sideways, even though the lamp sat still. A chair's shadow curled like it had fingers reaching up the wall. Ethan walked past a mirror and saw himself lagging behind. Just for a second, but enough. Enough to make him stop, turn around, and stare at the glass, waiting for his reflection to catch up. It never did. The mirror remained still. His reflection stood with its back turned. Ethan didn't move, didn't blink, couldn't even breathe. He watched as his mirror image slowly raised one hand and pressed it against the glass from the inside. Then it turned its head slightly, just enough to show one eye, hollow, black, and wet, staring back at him. He backed away until he hit the opposite wall. The mirror shattered, splinters of glass flying into the air, but never landing. They hung there, frozen, like time had paused. Then they fell, all at once, with the sound of 1,000 tiny bones shattering on tile. The house was warping reality now. It wasn't enough to haunt. It wanted to rewrite. Later that night, Ethan found the clock in the dining room had stopped, not ticking, not humming, its pendulum still as stone. It always read the same time now, 3:33 a.m., no matter when he looked, no matter how many times he rewound it. And every time the hands clicked back to 3:33, something in the walls exhaled. He could feel it, like a breath against his neck. Then the whispers started again, not from one direction, but all around him. Layered voices, male and female, old and young, chanting something beneath the edge of language, something felt more than heard. The words slipped between the cracks of meaning like water through fingers. He recorded it, played it back. The audio didn't make sense. Played forward, it was static. Played in reverse, a sentence. You are in the hollow between seconds. That's when Ethan noticed the clocks. All of them had vanished. Even his phone had no time. It didn't matter anymore. Time no longer belonged to him. The house had stolen it. He wandered the halls that night, hoping to wear himself down to exhaustion, to collapse into unconsciousness and find peace even in nightmares. But the house had other plans. Each room shifted as he entered, ceilings taller, floors sinking, hallways curving into themselves like bias strips. At one point, he opened a closet door and found an endless stairway spiraling downward into pitch black. He slammed it shut. He didn't dare go down. He'd seen what waited in the dark. He passed a window and froze. Outside, something stared back. Its shape was vague, like a smear of smoke with red eyes. It hovered just beyond the glass, and though Ethan knew it had no mouth, he could feel it smiling. It whispered one word, soon. The next morning, if it was morning at all, Ethan woke up in a room he didn't recognize. The bed was soft. The curtains were open. Outside, the sky was blue. Birds chirped. It was peaceful. He panicked. It was too normal. He jumped out of bed, ran to the hallway, and found a woman standing at the end of it. Tall, thin, dressed in black, her back to him. "Hello," he called. She didn't move. He stepped closer, cautiously. Are you real?" She turned around. No face. Just smooth, stretched skin where features should have been. Still, she looked at him. Somehow, and lifted one hand, pointing down the hall. Her fingers were long. Too long, with too many joints. She opened her mouth, a slit forming where there had been none, and spoke, but not with words. A scream erupted from her throat, not loud, not shrill, but deep, shaking the walls, vibrating the floor, sinking into Ethan's bones like a disease. He covered his ears and collapsed, screaming himself until everything went black. When he came to, he was back in the original bedroom. Back in the real world, or what was left of it. The house had shown him something, a warning, or a promise. He didn't know which. He checked the footage again. The camera had caught something this time. A single frame, a still image of a family standing in front of the house, smiling, familiar. It was the Holbrooks. But someone else stood in the window behind them. Him, Ethan. He was in a photograph from 1987. That was impossible. He stared at the screen until his vision blurred. That night, he searched the attic for answers. It was the only place he hadn't explored. He found the hatch above the second-floor hallway and pulled it open. A gust of hot air hit his face, thick, rotten, like meat left out in the sun. He climbed the creaking ladder, flashlight clenched between his teeth. The attic was huge. Bigger than the house should have allowed. Dozens of boxes, old trunks, toys, furniture covered in sheets, and in the center of the room, a rocking chair. It rocked slowly, though no one sat in it. He approached, careful not to breathe too loudly. On the chair, a photo album. He picked it up and flipped through it. Page after page of faces. Some normal, some distorted. Some with eyes gouged out, mouth sewn shut. Near the back, a photo of Ethan, taken just 2 days ago. Sleeping on the couch, camera on his lap. No one had taken that picture. He dropped the album and backed away. Then the attic door slammed shut. The flashlight flickered. Something moved behind the boxes. A scraping sound, metal on wood. Then breathing. Heavy. Wheezing. He turned toward the rocking chair, now empty. A voice whispered behind him. 14 days left. 14 doors to open. 14 names to remember. He spun around. Nothing. But etched into the floor now, glowing faintly in red, was a message: the 13th face is yours. He didn't know what it meant, but he had a feeling he would soon. That night, the walls bled. Thin lines of black ichor oozed from the seams, dripping down like veins ruptured by something trying to push out. The house groaned, and Ethan understood. It wasn't just alive. It was giving birth to something, and he was the one. The face in the mirror came back just before midnight. This time, it spoke. "You're almost ready," it said. The others fought. "You're smarter." Ethan screamed and shattered the mirror. The voice echoed from the shards. Soon, he didn't sleep again. He couldn't. Time had no meaning. Reality had no anchor. And something was watching from the hollow between seconds. Waiting. On the 15th day, Ethan woke up without a name. Not that he forgot it. No, he knew he had a name. He remembered the letters, the syllables, even how it sounded in his head. But when he tried to say it out loud, nothing came. Just air. Just silence. As if the house had reached down his throat while he slept and stolen it. He scrambled for his journal, the one he used to track every strange event, every time lapse, every whisper. He flipped to the first page where he'd written his name the day he arrived. Blank. The ink was still there. The pressure marks on the page clear. But where his name should have been, the page shimmered, and then blinked clean, as if his identity had been quietly erased from the paper and the world itself. In a blind panic, he shouted into the silence, But the sentence broke apart like ash in wind. The house knew. It had taken something vital. Not just his memory, not just a word, but the very thing that tethered him to who he was. And somehow, he knew this was only the beginning. The kitchen mirror confirmed it. His reflection stood there, a little too still, a little too late to move with him, with eyes that blinked separately. It opened its mouth and whispered his name, not aloud, not with sound, but with the wet, greasy stretch of lips, and he heard it in his mind like a buried voice rising from a well. He didn't know which was worse, that the house had stolen his name, or that it now owned it. By midday, the house had begun changing faster. The hallways extended, then snapped back short when he wasn't looking. Doors multiplied. Some melted into the walls. Others twisted open to reveal brick, tunnels, or occasionally, nothing at all. Just blackness, humming like it was alive, calling to him like it had lips but no face. Ethan started writing numbers on the doors with charcoal. Within hours, the numbers changed. Door 3 became 7, door 1 vanished. Door 6 screamed when he touched the knob. In one room, he found a chair in the center of the floor, nailed down. surrounded by handprints. Dozens of them, small and childlike, all smeared in something dark red and long dried. Above the chair, scrawled in jagged writing across the ceiling, Sai Tian Farjit. He didn't. He couldn't. But curiosity itched beneath his skin, like worms under the surface, and part of him, a louder part than he liked, wanted to see what would happen if he obeyed. He left the room, slammed the door, marked it as dangerous, and still he heard the chair creak when he walked away. The photographs returned that night, laid out on the floor of the hallway like breadcrumbs, leading him room by room. Each photo depicted a face, a moment, a loss. The first showed the Holbrook family at dinner, all smiling. The second showed their plates overturned, no faces. The third was just the table, empty. He picked up the fourth. It was his face. Blank, like the image had been scrubbed from existence. All that remained were two dark hollows where eyes should have been, and a smear across the mouth. A note lay beneath the final picture, a yellowed scrap with ragged edges and dried blood along the corners. It read, "You are not the first, Ethan. You are the last." He dropped the note and ran. That night, he dreamt of a room that didn't exist. He stood in a library, ceiling impossibly high, walls lined with shelves that stretched forever. But instead of books, the shelves were filled with jars, each labeled, each filled with something moving, flickering lights, swirling darkness, sometimes even human parts suspended in thick, yellow liquid. He approached one shelf and read the label Isaac Holbrook, taken on day 16, then another Margaret Holbrook, taken on day 19. The jars shimmered as he passed, whispering things that made his skin twitch. Things about doors that never stayed shut, about the skin of the house, about how memory rots in the corners. He found a jar labeled Ethan Caldwell, taken on day 15. It was empty, and the lid was loose. He woke gasping, heart pounding, a wetness around his chest, as if something had been feeding while he slept. He yanked up his shirt and found 3 long scratches down his ribs, like the house had reached through the dream and marked him in the real. He bandaged it, but they kept reopening, wounds that wanted to bleed. The next day the house grew colder, not in temperature, but in mood. Every room he entered felt like walking into the middle of a funeral. The air pressed on his ears. The lights, dimmer now than ever, flickered in time with his breath, and something new had started. A bell, distant at first, like a church toll echoing from a foggy mountain. But every hour it rang louder. He counted the chimes. 15, then 16, then 17. It wasn't counting time, it was counting him. Each toll marked another part of him lost, another step closer to whatever end the house was dragging him toward. That night, the house gave him a gift, a locked box placed neatly on his bed. No key, no message, just silence. He stared at it for hours before touching it. Something about the box repelled thought. When he closed his eyes near it, he saw flashes. Screaming children, hands with too many fingers, a man with no jaw crawling through ash. He finally found the key tucked behind a loose brick in the fireplace. When he opened it, the smell hit first, like old meat left in the sun. Inside, a collection of objects: a wedding ring, a pacifier, a cracked pair of reading glasses, and, tucked at the bottom, a cassette tape labeled "Do Not Play Until Day 20. His hands trembled. He placed the tape on the table, then shoved the box under the bed. He would burn it in the morning. He didn't. The box returned to the center of the bed the next day. Tape still inside, now labeled "Play Me Now." He didn't remember writing that, but the handwriting was his. That night, the walls of the house began breathing. Not metaphorically. Literally. They expanded and contracted, groaning with each cycle, like the house had lungs and it was waking up. Doors pulsed, windows fogged with each exhale. And Ethan, for the first time, felt like he was inside something, not living in it. He wasn't in a house. He was in a body, and it was slowly digesting him. In the hallway, he found one final message scratched into the paint with something sharp, The house does not trap people. It eats them. It starts with their name, then their time, then their face, then their soul. He dropped to his knees, shaking. He couldn't remember his last name anymore. Couldn't remember what his mother's voice sounded like. Couldn't remember the color of the sky. The house was almost done. And Ethan, or whatever was left of him, had no idea if he'd make it to the 30th day. But he knew one thing. Something was coming for him now. Something old. Something buried deep beneath Carter Hill, breathing through the walls, calling through the mirrors, pulling his memories out one strand at a time. And it had waited a long, long time to be born again. By the 16th night, Ethan had stopped counting days out loud. It felt like giving the house something. Acknowledgement, permission, maybe even power. Every time he whispered a number, something noticed. So he kept quiet, wrote dates in chalk on the underside of the dresser, crossed out each one before sleeping, though sleep itself had become a twisted parody of rest. He didn't dream anymore. He relived. Each time his eyes closed, the house fed him memories that weren't his. Memories soaked in ash, in blood, in screaming that never ended. On this night, something strange happened. The house gave him peace. The air was still. No shadows flickering in corners. No teeth behind the mirrors. No whispers crawling up through the floorboards. He almost dared to believe the worst had passed. That maybe, just maybe, the house was tired. Maybe it was done. That illusion shattered when he opened the guest room door. It was the only room he hadn't dared to enter. It had always been cold. Not temperature cold. Dead cold. A stillness that felt like a warning, like walking into a mausoleum and hearing the stone above the crypt breathe. But tonight, it was warm. A soft, golden glow leaked from beneath the door, like sunlight at dusk. It smelled of burnt cinnamon and old perfume. Comforting. Deceptively comforting. Ethan opened it and found a perfect room. Polished oak floors. Velvet curtains gently swaying. A record player spinning something soft and slow. The bed was freshly made, with crisp white sheets and fluffed pillows. A fire crackled in the hearth. But none of this made him feel safe, because something inside the room was watching him. He didn't see it. Not right away. But the moment he stepped through the door, he felt its gaze crawl over his skin like hot wax. The walls seemed too still, the silence too thick. Even the flames in the fireplace burned wrong. Not orange, but a deep, pulsing red. He turned toward the mirror above the mantel and saw her. A woman in a red gown stood just behind him in the reflection, head tilted, mouth sewn shut with black thread. Her eyes bled slowly, not tears, but blood, thick and sluggish. He turned around. The room was empty. He faced the mirror again. Now she was closer. He stepped back. Her eyes followed. Then the record stopped playing. The fire hissed and went black, and the room exhaled heat, real heat, like the walls had turned to furnace stone. The mirror cracked at the edges. The red-dressed woman in the reflection raised one trembling hand and placed it on the inside of the glass. A voice pressed against Ethan's skull like a migraine. She remembers the fire. So will you. The curtains ignited first. Silent, bright instant. Then the bed. Then the walls. The flames didn't spread like normal fire. They lipped like they were alive, choosing what to consume. Ethan ran, stumbling into the hallway just as the door slammed shut behind him. The fire didn't escape the room, but the heat did. It followed him. Every step he took, the floorboards glowed faintly, like coals beneath his feet. Pictures on the wall curled and blackened. Wallpaper peeled in strips, revealing not drywall, but meat, wet, pulsing. The house was shedding its skin. That night, Ethan sat in the hallway with a bucket of water and bandages. The soles of his feet were blistered, burned. The fire hadn't touched him, but it had. That was how this place worked. You didn't need to be physically harmed to bleed. It whispered pain directly into your nerves. The silence broke around 3 a.m., a soft, steady knock at the front door. Not frantic, not rushed. just polite, like a guest arriving late to dinner. He didn't move. The knock came again, and then a voice. Feminine, too calm. Mr. Caldwell, I've come for your name. He stayed perfectly still. You owe us a memory, the voice said. One true, one warm, one that tastes like honey. Ethan squeezed his eyes shut. He thought of the ocean. His mother's laugh. The first bite of birthday cake at age 5. That girl from high school he almost kissed in the rain. He clutched those moments tight, refusing to let them go. But the voice was in the walls now. I see her. The girl. She was never yours. The memory began to fade. Her face blurred. The rain stopped. He opened his eyes and wept. The memory was gone, taken. By morning, 7 more photos lined the hallway. Each one an image from his childhood. Each one burned at the edges. Each one with no faces. The house was devouring his past. That day, Ethan tried something new. He tore up floorboards in the master bedroom, searching for anything. A root, a wire, a heart. Something he could attack. Something he could kill. What he found was worse. A spiral staircase, stone and ancient. Hidden beneath the floor. He didn't go down. Not yet. Instead, he returned to the box. The one with the tape labeled Play Me Now. He had no more resistance left. He fed the tape into the player. It clicked. Hummed. Then silence. Then his own voice. Day 21. I've made it to the bottom. I saw the red woman again. She spoke this time. Pause. A hiss. She told me I've always been here. Static. I don't think I ever left New York. I think the house called me before I was born. Crackling. I saw my face on the walls. With the others. We're all the same. Repeating. Living. Dying. Living again. This house, it's a loop. Static. I remember now. I've lived here 6 times. Then screaming. His own screaming. Ethan ripped the tape from the machine and hurled it across the room. It shattered. But the screaming continued. From the fireplace. He ran, heart about to burst. But the fire wasn't burning. It was wide open, like a gaping mouth. And deep inside, flickering at the bottom, another version of himself. Naked, curled, eyes wide, pleading. He watched himself be pulled backward into the dark by something with no shape. That night, Ethan didn't sleep. He sat in the hallway with a knife in his hand, carving into the floor. Not symbols, not words, just marks, tallies, like a prisoner marking time. But he didn't know what day it was anymore. The fire room was silent again, but the floor beneath him breathed slowly. And somewhere in the house, a voice he hadn't heard before whispered with joy. He's soft now, ready to feed. Ethan's grip tightened on the knife. He knew what he had to do. He had to go down the stairs beneath the bedroom. He had to find the center of the house. The place where the names go. The place that dreamed of fire. Because the house was hungry, and he was running out of memories to lose. By the time Ethan removed the last of the floorboards in the master bedroom, he no longer remembered the sound of traffic, the feeling of summer heat, or what it felt like to fall asleep without fear. His world was now entirely composed of creaking wood, endless whispers, and walls that pulsed like flesh. The staircase beneath the room wasn't just hidden, it had been buried. Buried beneath layers of wood, dust, and time itself, as if something long ago had tried to smother it, to seal it away forever. But the house had allowed him to find it. No, wanted him to. The stone steps spiraled into a darkness that didn't feel natural. Ethan had encountered darkness many times in the past 2 weeks. Shadows that moved. Blackouts that felt like sleep without rest. But this was deeper. This was the kind of dark that didn't just hide what was inside, it consumed it. He tied a flashlight to his wrist with the last piece of clean cloth he could find. It didn't feel like armor. It felt like a candle held up to a storm. The air grew thicker as he descended, moist, heavy with mold and something metallic that settled on his tongue like rusted coins. The stone was ancient, etched with carvings he didn't recognize, spirals and jagged lines that seemed to shift when he blinked. He couldn't tell how long he was descending. 5 minutes, 20. Time didn't move the same down here. The stairs finally ended in a corridor, so narrow he had to turn sideways to pass through it. The walls were damp, coated in a thin black slime that pulsed gently like veins. He came upon the first door unexpectedly, a wooden thing, bowed and blistered, with no handle, just an iron ring in the center, and a name scrawled across the top in what looked like charcoal, or maybe something darker. Margaret Holbrook. He stared at the name, heart slamming against his ribs. That was the mother, the one who'd vanished in 1987. He touched the ring and the door creaked open without force. Inside was a bedroom. Small, claustrophobic. A mirror leaned against the wall. A rocking chair slowly moved, though no one sat in it. On the bed lay a figure, still, pale and lifeless. It was her. But something was wrong. Her face was blank, smooth like melted wax. No eyes, no mouth, just a featureless oval with hair spread like seaweed across a blood-stained pillow. Her chest rose and fell with shallow breaths. Alive, but not awake. Ethan stepped back and the door slammed shut on its own. The hallway pulsed again, stronger now as if the house were aware of his progress. He moved on, door after door. Isaac Holbrook, Lila Holbrook, even one labeled simply the first. Each room held a person, sleeping, empty-faced, forgotten, suspended between life and death in a place no one should ever be. None of them woke, none moved. But they breathed, and in that breath was horror, because it meant the house was keeping them alive, feeding off them, holding them like meat in storage. At the end of the hallway, he found a door unlike the others. It wasn't made of wood or metal, but of something black and slick like stone dipped in oil. No name on it. No ring to pull. Just a slit down the center, as though it had once been split apart by something violent. As he stood before it, the walls around him whispered in voices not his own. He is the echo. He is the next. He is the key. Then the door opened. Inside, there was no furniture, no mirrors, no beds, just a room filled with names. Dozens, maybe hundreds of names carved into the walls, some old and faded, some fresh and deep. He recognized a few: Caldwell, Holbrook, Merton, Ashy. Others were unknown to him but felt familiar, like dreams half remembered. In the center of the room sat a well, not the kind with bricks and rope, but a hole in the ground framed in bone. It breathed cold air, and from its depths came the hum, low, slow, ancient, the same sound he'd heard in his dreams. The sound of it. Ethan stepped forward, compelled, pulled by something deeper than curiosity. He looked down into the well and saw himself. Not a reflection, not a hallucination. Another version of him, face pale and terrified, floating in the blackness. This version opened its eyes and screamed silently, mouth opening wide to show nothing but darkness inside. Then the darkness rushed upward. He staggered back, tripped, and landed hard as the black void exploded from the well and filled the room. Shapes formed in the mist, hands, faces, twisting bodies, all of them begging, not to be freed, but to be forgotten. They reached for him, clutching, pulling, whispering his name. The one the house had stolen, each syllable drawn out like an old lullaby. "You are the house," one of them moaned. "You've always been." A shape formed behind the mist, tall, skeletal, with too many arms and a head split down the middle. No eyes, no mouth. Just a gaping hole where its chest should be, from which a low, pulsing light throbbed. It stepped forward, dragging the darkness with it. Ethan couldn't move. It spoke in his mind. "You are the final memory. Once you are gone, the house will rest. Until it hungers again." He tried to run, but his feet were rooted to the stone. Not stuck, grown in, as if he had become part of the room. He looked down and saw roots sprouting from his ankles, snaking into the cracks. "No," he whispered. "Not me. I remember who I am. I remember." A blast of heat, a flash of red, the fire room again. The woman in the red dress stood beside him, mouth still sewn shut, but her eyes, they pleaded. She raised one hand and pointed, not at him, but at the creature. Then she lifted the other hand and tore the stitches from her mouth. Her lips blood, her voice cracked, and she screamed, "Your name is your anchor." Ethan fell backward, gasping. His name, his real name. He forced the memory out, clawing through layers of fear and pain. He pictured the sound of it. The way his mother said it when he was 5. The way he'd signed it on every school form, every ID, every slip of mail.
"Ethan Joseph Caldwell!"
He shouted. The room shook. The creature stopped. The roots withered around his feet. The faces in the mist screamed and recoiled. The walls of the house above howled with rage, cracks forming in the ceiling like lightning bolts. The well groaned, collapsing inward with a shudder. Ethan ran. Through the hallway. Past the sleepers. Past the stairs. He didn't look back. When he burst into the bedroom, the floor sealed behind him. The boards stitched themselves together, erasing any sign that the entrance had ever existed. The house trembled. The wallpaper peeled in waves. Lamps shattered. Windows cracked. But it didn't fall. No, it was angry. It had been denied. That night, Ethan slept for the first time in days. Not because he felt safe, but because he was too drained to do anything else. And in his sleep, he dreamed of a clock. The hands read day 17. The tick slowed. But it hadn't stopped. He had 13 days left. 13 days to escape. 13 days to destroy the house, or be devoured completely. Because now the house knew what he remembered, and it was coming for his name again. The 17th day didn't begin with a sound. It began with an absence. A hole in the fabric of reality Ethan had grown used to. The air no longer whispered. The walls had stopped breathing. Even the floor beneath his feet felt too still. The house wasn't dead. No, he'd never be that lucky. It was watching. Quiet, calculating. It had lost something in the basement below, and now it was adjusting. Like an animal testing which part of the trap had failed before resetting the jaws. Ethan stood in the bedroom, where the staircase had vanished beneath the floor, listening to the silence. He touched the floorboards where the portal once opened, and found them warm, faintly pulsing, like skin. Healing. It unsettled him more than anything yet. The idea that the house could recover. That it could learn. The night before, he had torn his name back from the house's grip. Reclaimed something personal. But now that he had it again, he felt the weight of it pressing down like a chain. A name in this house was not freedom. It was bait. And the house now knew exactly where to bite. He spent the day searching, not for answers. Those no longer mattered. The house lied, twisted, baited, and fed on confusion. Answers were just another trap. No, he searched for something else. A pattern. And he found it. It started in the photographs. The ones that still lined the hallway like gravestones, each one now cracked and faded, as if burned from the inside out. 13 frames. 12 of them now bore a black smear over the face, not scratched out, but burned, like acid had eaten away the identity behind the eyes. Only one photo remained untouched, his. He moved from room to room counting. 13 beds, 13 mirrors, 13 locked drawers in the kitchen cabinets. And when he pried open the trapdoor beneath the stairs, a second one, newly formed, where the old entry had been, he saw 13 steps leading down into fresh darkness. The house was counting something, not time, not days. Victims, 13 doors, 13 rooms, 13 pieces of something it was trying to build or consume. And he was the 13th. That night, the hallway changed. Again, the door at the far end, the one that used to lead to a broom closet, now stood taller, broader, made of blackened iron and etched with jagged symbols he could barely look at without his eyes watering. Carved across the top, crudely and deeply, was the word Th. He opened it. Inside, a corridor of doors stretched impossibly far, each one tall, colorless, identical but for the doorknob a tooth. 13 doors, 13 teeth, some human, some animal, one the size of a fist, cracked and yellowed. The doors thrummed with quiet energy, and as Ethan walked past them, they clicked, as if reacting to his presence. The first door creaked open on its own. Inside, a child's nursery, twisted, rotted, but somehow preserved in its cruelty. Toys dangled from the ceiling by their entrails. The wallpaper was made of stitched skin, marked with crayon scribbles that bled. In the crib sat a bundle of cloth, a doll. No, a jawbone human, clean. Ethan reached for it and flinched as the crib rattled violently. Something beneath the fabric moved, stretching upward as if to mimic a reaching hand. He grabbed the jawbone and ran, slamming the door behind him. As he stepped back into the hallway, the first tooth, knob cracked, crumbled to ash, and the door disappeared. The second door was already opening. The game had begun. Behind the second door was a kitchen, identical to the one in the house above. Same chip counters, same dusty fridge, except this version was filled with meat, slabs of raw flesh hanging from hooks, some human, some not. The floor was slick with blood, and something skittered behind the cupboards. He didn't look for long. On the counter, a glass of water, perfectly clear, unmoving. He stared at it for a moment, breath shallow. Then it blinked. He threw it against the wall. Inside the shattered glass, twitching on the tile, was a tongue, still moving, still trying to speak. He ran. Door 2 vanished. The tooth fell to the floor and cracked open, filled with black ink. By the time he reached the 7th door, his hands were shaking uncontrollably. He had collected 6 objects, all parts. A jawbone, a tongue, a severed ear, a broken rib, a glass eye, and a ring finger still wearing a wedding band. He didn't know why he took them. But the house wanted him too. It was building something, or summoning, maybe both. Behind door 7, the rules changed. The room was filled with people, faces he knew. His father, smiling and alive, offering a chair at the kitchen table. His mother stirring soup on the stove. His childhood dog wagging its tail by the fireplace. Warm light, laughter, safety. For the first time in 17 days, Ethan wept. He stepped into the room. The moment he did, their faces began to melt. One by one, like wax under a blowtorch, their features ran down their necks, eyes liquefying, mouths stretching into impossible screams that made no sound. His father stood up, mouth gaping, and let out a wet hiss that chilled Ethan to his bones. The soup pot tipped over. Boiling black tar spilled across the floor, bubbling and whispering one word over and over, "Stay." He bolted. Behind him. The laughter returned, high, frantic, hollow. Door 7 exploded behind him in a shower of splinters. 6 remain, and with each door gone, the house grew louder, more aggressive. Walls trembled at night. Doors opened without sound. Furniture blood. At one point, he watched his own reflection peel its face off, layer by layer, whispering, "You're just meat. Soon you'll be home." He didn't sleep. Didn't eat. Didn't speak. And yet he kept opening doors. Door 8 led to an empty theater where the audience was all versions of himself, each rotting at different speeds. They clapped as he entered. Door 9 opened into a corridor where gravity reversed, and he spent hours crawling across the ceiling to escape a swarm of black moths with human eyes. Door 10 was simply a coffin. Open. Waiting. His name etched on the lid. He climbed inside. Because part of him wanted to see what lay beyond. Inside was silence. True silence. So complete, so total, he felt his thoughts begin to scream just to fill the void. He lasted 63 seconds. He counted. When he emerged, the hallway had changed again. 3 doors remained, and at the end of the hall stood a mirror, full length, clean. In it, he saw himself. But not now. Not as he was, bruised, trembling, half mad. This version of Ethan wore a suit, stood straight, smiled. Behind him, the house was whole, bright, clean. The Ethan in the mirror placed a hand against the glass and whispered, "I made it." "You won't." The mirror shattered. The last 3 doors glowed faintly now, 13 teeth, each one broken, except the last, a golden fang, gleaming, waiting. Ethan collapsed on the floor between door 12 and 13. He had nothing left. But he still had his name, and the house hated that. So as he lay there, whispering it over and over, "Ethan Joseph Caldwell, Ethan Joseph Caldwell," The house screamed. Not a sound, a feeling, a vibration that crawled into his stomach and coiled there like a serpent. Door 13 creaked open, and from inside came a voice. His voice, laughing, sobbing, begging. And then, quietly, I was the last, you're the beginning. He looked inside, and saw a staircase leading up, into a new room he hadn't seen before. A room full of light. A room that pulsed like a heart. He stepped inside, because it wasn't about finishing anymore. It was about finding the source, the core, the mouth, because he now understood something horrifying. The house wasn't built on a grave. The house was the grave, and Ethan, he was the tooth that hadn't fallen out yet. The staircase behind the 13th door was wrong from the first step. It didn't descend into the earth like the others. It rose, twisting upward into the space, where, logically, there should have been only roof. But the house had stopped obeying the laws of the world long ago. What was once a creaking Victorian relic was now a living, breathing organism. And this staircase, this was its throat. Ethan could feel the steps pulsing underfoot, slick with warmth like flesh, flexing slightly with each movement, as if something deep below was swallowing in reverse. He ascended slowly, flashlight in one hand, the golden fang from door 13 clenched in the other like a weapon. The hallway behind him was gone now. No turning back. Not physically. Not mentally. He'd left behind the version of himself that had arrived at Carter Hill. That person was already buried. In memory, in madness, maybe even in meat. The higher he climbed, the heavier the air became. Not with dust, but with pressure. As if the house resented his presence, resented his progress. The walls oozed warmth. The wooden beams around the staircase twisted and bent, ribs instead of rafters, arching over him like the interior of a living creature. He tried not to think about the word esophagus, but it stuck in his head like a thorn. At the top, there was a door, unlike any other in the house. No knob, no hinges, just a surface, wet and red, thudding in a slow rhythm. A door made of muscle. The heart, this was it. He pressed the golden fang against it. The flesh sizzled, spasmed, then opened. Not like a door swings open, but like a wound pulled apart. And beyond it was the room. He wasn't prepared. No part of him was. The heart room wasn't a room. It was an open space, suspended in the core of the house, where the walls were bone and the ceiling was a sky of writhing tendons. The floor was soft, spongy, living, pulsing to the beat of a massive heart hanging from the center of the space, tethered by thick ropes of sinew and vein. It floated, swaying slightly, and every thump shook the air. It wasn't metaphor. It was literal. The house had a heart, and it was alive. Ethan stepped forward, barely breathing. Every motion echoed. His footsteps triggered pulses through the floor like sonar, and he realized quickly. The house wasn't just watching him now. It was feeling him. Below the heart sat a pit, a shallow basin filled with bones, skulls, hands, vertebrae coiled into spirals. They weren't just collected. They were arranged, like offerings. Among them, at the very center, sat a mirror, small, square, old. The kind you'd find in a hallway of a house long gone to rot. But this mirror didn't reflect Ethan. It showed the house. Not how it was, but how it used to be. Children laughing in the yard, a man painting the porch, a woman wiping her hands on a dish towel while music played softly in the background. And as Ethan leaned closer, he recognized them. The Holbrooks, alive, smiling, before the house had turned, before it had woken up. Then the image changed, smoke, screaming. Something pulling itself from the walls, not a ghost, not a demon. Something older, shapeless, a hunger given form. He saw the family taken, not all at once but in order. Isaac first, then Margaret, then Leela, and then the house sealed itself, kept them alive in pieces, dreams recycled, pain rewound. Ethan reeled back, gasping. The mirror cracked, the heart twitched, then a voice, impossibly close, inside his skull, whispered, "You made it. Just like the others. Just like you always do." He turned. There was no one there, yet the room was full. Faces pushed from the walls, pressed in like worms beneath skin, all of them versions of him. Dead eyes, open mouths, some whispering, some screaming. One laughed until its jaw dislocated and hung open like a cracked shell. "You were born from me," the voice said, "carried in flesh, shaped by rot." The heart beat faster. "Ethan Joseph Caldwell," it hissed, mocking. "That was your name this time, but before that, before you." The bones in the pit began to shake. One by one, they floated upward, assembling. First a hand, then a spine, then a rib cage. It was building. "You are not a man," the voice said. "You are a memory, replayed, reborn, refused." A skull rose and clicked into place on top. The skeleton stepped forward, and Ethan recognized its face, his own, only older, eyes hollow. Skin like paper stretched over bone. "You are the 13th, it whispered. "You were always the 13th. Ethan backed away. The doppelganger smiled, or tried to. It cracked open a line across its face that passed for lips. "You are the house. We all are. It feeds on us from within. We don't live here." It stepped closer. "We are here." The heart above them pulsed harder, faster. The walls wept. Blood poured from the ceiling like rain. And Ethan understood the horrible truth. There was no center of the house. There was no heart room. There was only inside. He was inside himself. The house was him. And it had always been. He screamed. Not in fear, but in defiance. He raised the golden fang, the last tooth, and drove it into the floor. The world convulsed. A scream ripped through every wall, every mirror, every bone. The heart burst above them, showering the room in black, tar, thick blood. The floor heaved. The skeleton let out a long, rattling sigh and collapsed into dust. And then silence. Real silence. For the first time since he'd arrived, Ethan stood alone in the room. No faces in the walls. No whispering in the dark. Just him, and the open door behind him. He walked through it, and found himself in the master bedroom again. Morning light poured in through the window. Birds chirped. The walls were clean. The house is silent. He walked through every room. No whispers. No doors with teeth. No stairways to nowhere. Just dust and old wood. The kind of quiet that made you question if it had ever happened. But he remembered. He remembered everything. And when he stepped outside, truly outside into the sun, into the real world, he wept. But only once. Because even as he left, he felt it. That slight tug in the back of his mind. The echo. The heartbeat. It wasn't over. The house wasn't destroyed. It had just changed hosts, and Ethan, whether he escaped or not, would carry its rooms forever. The sun was a lie. Ethan had stood there on the overgrown porch for what felt like hours, eyes squinting into the morning light, feeling the breeze brush against his skin, for the first time in what he assumed was over 2 weeks. The birds sang, the trees swayed. The gravel crunched underfoot as he stepped down into the yard that once felt like the edge of a nightmare, but now looked like nothing more than a lonely house forgotten by time. But something was wrong, not wrong in the obvious, screaming way that had filled every corner of Carter Hill for 17 days, but wrong like a single, missing thread in a shirt. You can't see it right away, but once you do, it's all you can see. It was too quiet, too still. The leaves moved but made no sound. The birds flitted between branches but flapped in silence. Even the crunch of gravel under his own feet made no echo. No sharp crunch, more like a suggestion of sound. It was as though the entire world had been muffled. As if he hadn't escaped the house at all, but carried it with him like a coffin stitched inside his shadow. He told himself it was trauma. That was the logical thing to believe. The kind of story doctors in clean white coats would nod along with while scribbling in their little notebooks. Delusions brought on by isolation and grief. Maybe even hallucinations triggered by old mold or air toxins from the house's decay. Yes, that would make sense. But then the ticking began. It started on the 3rd day after he left the house. Subtle, barely audible. He noticed it at night. A soft tick, 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 like a grandfather clock hidden inside the walls. He checked every corner of the motel room, unplugged the alarm clock, turned off his phone. But the sound remained. When he pressed his ear to the wall, it grew louder. On the fifth day, he began hearing it outside, in the trees, in his car, in the sky. It never stopped, not fully. It faded in crowds, drowned out by city noise. But the moment silence returned, so did the ticking. It seemed to be counting something. Not seconds. Not hours. Something deeper. It was counting him. He returned to his apartment in Queens and tried to resume a normal life. Grocery stores. Emails. Streaming shows. But every time he passed a mirror, the glass trembled faintly. Every time he turned on the stove, it hissed a little too long. Every time he entered a dark room, he could feel it. Not the presence of the house, but something subtler. A memory embedded in the space between things. The same way you remember pain, even after the wound has healed. The worst came when he opened his bedroom closet. There, etched into the wood of the inside door, 13 small tally marks. No one had been inside. He lived alone. He stared at them for an hour, heart hammering, breath shallow, the echo of that tick, tick, tick beating just behind his eyes. He tried to convince himself he had carved them during a breakdown. Maybe sleepwalking. Maybe dreaming. Then the next morning, there were 14. And below them, scrawled in a handwriting he recognized, but hadn't used since he was a child, "You forgot one." He packed a bag that afternoon. Notebooks, tapes, photographs. Everything he could collect from the Carter Hill house. He boarded a train upstate, back to Blackridge Hollow, and found the place almost exactly as he left it. The locals stared with the same coldness they had when he arrived, but now it was worse. Now there was recognition. He wasn't a stranger anymore. He was Mark. One old woman at the diner whispered it under her breath as he passed. Another one who walked out with the ticking. He didn't ask her what she meant. He already knew. The house had moved inside him. Not physically. No parasite. No infection. But something deeper. A presence that wore his skin and echoed behind his eyes. Carter Hill had released him not as a survivor, but as a vessel. And now it waited, counting down to whatever came next. He returned to the property. What he found made his blood freeze. The house was gone. Not demolished. Not burned. Just missing, no rubble. No foundation. Not even a scorch mark. The grass grew tall where it once stood. Wildflowers blooming. Trees bending gently in a wind that no longer screamed. Ethan stood at the center of where the living room once was and listened. And there it was again. The ticking. So loud now it made his bones ache. He dropped to his knees, clutching his head. And that's when he saw them. Boot prints. 13 pairs circled around him. None were his, some small, some wide. One set had only the left foot. They surrounded him, waiting, watching. That night, he dreamed of the heart again, not hanging in the house, but in him. He stood in front of a mirror, shirtless, and saw something beating beneath his skin, pulsing with each tick. And when he opened his mouth, the sound came from inside. A clockwork scream. The next morning, he awoke to a voicemail. A number he didn't recognize. A voice he hadn't heard in years. "Ethan, it's Mark. Your cousin. Listen, I don't know if this means anything, but we just inherited this old house in Maine from a great I never met. It's weird. The place makes sounds at night. Mirrors fog up. But the weirdest thing, there's this room upstairs. It's locked. And there's a note taped to the door. Pause. It says, 'Ask Ethan.' He'll understand." Ethan's hands trembled as the phone slipped from his grip. The house hadn't ended. It had moved down. It had grown. And now, it was opening again. New rooms, new names, new doors with teeth. And Ethan, he wasn't the final chapter. He was just the prologue. Ethan didn't call Mark back. He didn't need to. The moment he heard his cousin's voice and those final words, "Ask Ethan. He'll understand." He knew the house had already found its next seed. It had been passed like a sickness, Not through blood, not through intention, but through recognition. The moment someone saw the house, truly saw it, it opened. Just a crack at first, just enough to let a whisper in. Enough for the ticking to start. He packed a bag the same day. Not because he wanted to help, but because he had to. The ticking was louder now. It wasn't just behind his ears anymore, it was in his bones. In his heartbeat, in the spaces between his thoughts. He would wake in the night to find his hands moving without his consent, drawing spirals on the wall, scratching out words like return and door 13. Once, he caught himself staring at the hallway closet, convinced he saw it breathing. Another time, he opened the kitchen cupboard and found it full of teeth, just loose, scattered like rice. He blinked, and they were gone. But he remembered the sound they made when they shifted, like ceramic tapping against porcelain, like tiny things laughing. He boarded a train for Maine, numb and hollow, carrying nothing but a duffel bag full of clothes, notebooks, a flask of cold coffee, and the golden fang wrapped in a towel. He wasn't even sure why he brought it. Maybe some small, childish part of him believed it could be a key again. Maybe it would unlock something, or end something. He wasn't sure which he wanted more. The town was called Glenshade, a nowhere place off the coast, where the roads narrowed and the trees grew so thick they almost blocked out the sky. The air smelled of salt and pine. The houses looked like they'd been asleep for 100 years. But the moment he stepped off the bus, he felt it, the presence. Soft at first, like a pressure behind the eyes. Then a shift. In the clouds, in the wind, in the way the birds stopped singing. Something in the town had tilted. Something had opened. Mark met him at the diner. He looked normal. Too normal. The kind of normal that only felt stranger the longer you looked at it. Like someone trying too hard to look untouched. "I didn't know who else to call," he said over coffee. "I thought it was a joke. But then the dream started. And I saw your name written on the mirror one morning. Like, etched in frost. That ever happened to you?" Ethan just nodded. Mark sighed. "There's something wrong with the house." Ethan didn't respond. He already knew. They drove there in silence. It sat at the end of a long dirt road, where the trees bent unnaturally, branches twisting toward the structure like they were reaching out. It looked ordinary. A classic two-story farmhouse with weathered siding and flaking paint. A swing on the porch, creaking gently in the wind. But Ethan knew better. He felt it. Like a heartbeat buried beneath the floorboards. Like the breath of something waiting to inhale. Inside, the house was empty. Clean, no signs of decay. No mirrors cracked, no furniture overturned. It was like walking into a photograph. Too still. Too preserved. And yet, the moment he crossed the threshold, the ticking returned. Louder now, like it was welcoming him back. Mark showed him the room upstairs. The locked one. They stood in front of it for a long time, neither speaking. The door was old, painted black, with no knob, just a small brass plate near the top, engraved with a single word, OFERING. There was no key. There never was. Ethan stepped forward and pressed the golden fang against the wood. Nothing happened. But the door opened anyway. The room beyond was dark. Not lightless, but the kind of darkness that hummed, that breathed. The walls were covered in writing. Hundreds of names, scrawled in different hands, different styles, some barely legible. And in the center of the room, on a small wooden table, sat a mirror. No frame, no glass, just liquid, reflective, alive. Ethan stepped closer, and it shimmered, a ripple. Then an eye opened in the center, not human, not even animal, something older. Round and wet and deep. The eye blinked once, and when it opened again, it showed him a vision. Not the past, not the future, a house, but not just one, hundreds. 1,000 homes across the country, some small, some grand, some long abandoned, some newly built, and inside each one, a room, a door, a ticking. The house wasn't a place. It was a condition. It infected places, infected families, passed down through generations like bad blood. A memory that couldn't be forgotten. A hunger that lived in floorboards and wiring and mirrors. A need. And now it had reached Mark. It had found him. Ethan looked away from the mirror, breath ragged. Mark stood frozen, eyes wide, staring into something only he could see. Tears streamed down his cheeks. His lips moved, but no sound came out. Ethan grabbed him by the shoulders. "We leave. Now." But the door was already gone. Behind them, nothing but wall. The house had sealed them in. The room throbbed. The mirror pulsed. And from the floor, the ticking grew louder, faster. 13 ticks, then silence, and a voice that wasn't spoken but felt. One door closed. Another opens. The floor split open. A staircase. Not down, but inward. Ethan turned to Mark. "Don't follow," he said. Mark barely moved, his eyes still glued to something in the dark. "It's showing me her. Mom, from when I was a kid. I didn't even remember that memory until now. It feels real." "That's what it wants," Ethan said. "To make you feel. To make you forget what's real." "But it's beautiful," Mark whispered. "No," Ethan replied. "It's bait." And with that, he stepped onto the stairs. Each step was soft, like walking on lungs. The walls wept. The air grew thicker. And behind him, he heard the door shut. Not just the room door. All of them. The house was done waiting. It was time to show him what lay at the center of this hollow. It was time to meet the next heart. Because Carter Hill had been only the beginning. And now, the hunger had found a new name to wear. The stairs didn't lead down so much as inward, spiraling tighter with every step, the ceiling closing in like a collapsing lung. Each breath Ethan took tasted thicker than the last, like he was inhaling the house's memories. There were voices in the walls again, but they weren't whispering this time. They were murmuring, dozens of them, all at once, as if the rooms above. Mark, the mirror, the name scrawled across the offering door, had been left behind in a different body. Here, beneath the bones of this new place, Ethan had entered something even more personal, something living, not built. The walls were soft now, spongy with heat. Faint pulses rippled through them in time with the ticking that had become so constant it no longer sounded external. It was behind his ribs now, in the curve of his spine, in his blood. He had long given up the notion of rescue, of closure. He wasn't here to stop the house. That dream had died back in Carter Hill when he first saw his reflection bleeding through dimensions. He wasn't here to escape either. There was no outside anymore, not really. He was here because he was part of this now. A key in a lock that was never meant to stay closed. At the bottom of the stairwell, the space widened into what looked like a basement, but breathed like a womb. Roots hung from the ceiling, dangling in wet strands like hair, twitching as he passed beneath them. They weren't just growing from the house. They were the house. Each root pulsed with a dull red light, and as he moved deeper, he began to hear something buried inside the light. Not sound exactly, more like impressions, emotions, flashes of pain, panic, regret, hunger. The roots were feeling him, and he was beginning to feel them back. Ethan came to a large chamber that looked like it had been excavated by hand. Jagged walls lined with more roots, each one wrapped tightly around a figure. Human silhouettes pressed into the walls, half absorbed into the wood and rot. Their faces stuck mid-scream or mid-sob, eyes sealed with sap. They weren't dead. He could feel it. Each pulse in the roots was a heartbeat. The house wasn't just feeding on them. It was preserving them. One figure twitched as he passed. A hand jerked slightly from the wall and brushed his shoulder, cold and papery. It was a child, or what had once been one. The lips peeled open just enough to whisper something that wasn't a word, just a noise, a begging hum. Ethan kept walking. Because the truth was beginning to form in his mind now. The house didn't consume you in one gulp. It grew you, wore you like skin, turned you into an echo and let you ripen. Then, when your mind had rotted soft enough, it fed pieces of you to new rooms, new walls, new names. That's why the house kept doors locked. not to trap you, but to age you. He came to the center of the chamber, a clearing surrounded by the writhing walls. And in the middle, resting atop a pedestal of blackened bone, was a mass of roots tangled around something Ethan couldn't fully see. It shimmered, shifted. Like the moment before sleep when shapes blur, but he recognized one part of it clearly, a face, his own. Not just a version, his face. Mouth agape, eyes glassy, skin cracked. Frozen mid-scream. Half-formed, root-wrapped, a duplicate, and it was awake. It looked at him as he approached, mirroring his movements. Not like a reflection, but like a brother raised on the other side of the glass. Every twitch of the eye, every tilt of the head. But its expression didn't match his. It was smiling. Ethan stepped back. The thing smiled wider. Then, from somewhere deep in the chamber, the voice returned. Not the booming, inhuman one from the heart room. This one was familiar. His voice, speaking calmly, like a memory being recited. "You're the root now, Ethan." The roots on the walls twisted tighter, squeezing the sleeping bodies with a low creak. "You escaped once. The house doesn't like that. It left a seed in you. And now, the duplicate stepped down from the pedestal. Now it blooms." Ethan stumbled backward. "No, you're not me." The figure tilted its head. "No, I'm what you're going to become. I'm what the house wants you to be. An anchor, a doorway, a mask for someone else to wear." It stepped closer, reaching out. "Do you know how many of us there are?" Ethan said nothing, not just in this house. In every house like this, they bloom like tumors. They sleep in mirrors, wait in crawl spaces. They remember the names of the dead, but they always need a host to speak through. It tapped its own chest. The roots moved with it. "We are the memory. You are the mouth." Then the figure shuddered, its chest opened. Not split, peeled, like fruit. Inside was a hollow cavity, black and endless, a place Ethan recognized. He had seen it before. In dreams, in the well, in the fire. This was the core. This was where the others were. He stepped forward, against every scream in his mind, and stared into that cavity. And for a split second, he saw them. 13 figures. Not all were human anymore. Some had no faces. Others wore dozens. One was made entirely of mirrors. Another pulsed like a heart on legs. But all of them stared back at him, waiting. Then a single phrase echoed through the chamber, not spoken aloud, but pressed into his skull like hot iron. "You have been chosen to remember what others forget." The duplicate raised its arms. The roots reached out. Ethan turned to run, but the walls were already closing. The figures in the roots began to twitch violently. Moaning, the chamber trembled, the floor cracked, and from beneath it, something massive began to rise. It wasn't a monster. It was a room. A new room, being born from the ground, painted white, clean, sterile. A single chair in the center, a mirror on one wall, a recording light blinking above it. Ethan screamed, because he knew what it was. It was a confession room, and he was going to be forced to sit. To speak. To confess every memory the house had given him. And once he spoke them aloud, they'd no longer be his. They'd belong to it. Because that's what the house fed on now. Not just fear, but remembrance. The room had no door. It simply was erupting from the floor with a silent, skin-splitting crack. The way a wound reopens without warning. Ethan didn't step into it. The floor moved him there. A slow, relentless shove of bone and breath and memory that forced him forward, no matter how hard he dug in his heels. The roots behind him writhed like they were applauding. The room's walls glistened with a thin sheen of moisture. Not quite sweat. Not quite condensation. More like the afterbirth of something newly alive. The chair in the center was white, bolted to the floor, and padded with a softness that mocked comfort. Across from it, the mirror waited. Still, reflective, yet pulsing faintly. A red recording light above it blinked every 2 seconds like a mechanical heartbeat. Ethan tried to look away, but his eyes were pulled toward the mirror as though it held gravity. And then, as if he'd always meant to, he sat down. He didn't choose to. His body agreed to it without asking. The second he touched the chair, it sighed. That's the only word for it. A breath through stitched lips. A tired moan of satisfaction, like the room had been starving for contact and finally gotten its fill. The mirror came to life, not with an image, but with a face, his face. But younger, clean, smiling. Not the man who'd survived Carter Hill, not the hollow-eyed version that walked into Glenshade. This was Ethan from before. Before the name Stealing. Before the spiraling halls and doors with teeth. Before he ever heard the ticking. The Ethan who still believed houses were just wood and nails. And then the mirror spoke. But it wasn't the Ethan in the chair who spoke. It was the reflection. I'm Ethan Joseph Caldwell, born October 19th, 1992. I remember. The chair tightened beneath him, pressing into his back and arms like it was listening, like it wanted him still and receptive. The red light blinked faster. I remember the house on Carter Hill. I remember the girl in the red dress. I remember the 13 doors and the golden fang. I remember the ticking. The heart. The second version of me. Ethan shook his head, but the mirror didn't stop. I remember how the house smelled like cinnamon and rot. I remember the room where time went sideways. I remember the hallway that looped. I remember the fire that wasn't fire. I remember how my name vanished. I remember the photos of the Holbrooks. I remember the well. Ethan screamed.
Steal!
But the chair wouldn't let him move. Because the house wanted this. It wanted every last word pulled from his skull and spoken aloud. So it could own it. I remember waking up in a room that wasn't mine. The mirror Ethan continued. I remember the skeleton that wore my smile. I remember the feeling of being looked at through mirrors, even when I wasn't near one. I remember the eye in the floor. I remember the breath in the walls. Shut up, Ethan whispered, voice cracking. I remember when I stopped being me. The blinking light turned solid red. The mirror shimmered, and then went dark. The room fell silent. And in that silence, Ethan felt it, the absence. All those memories, gone. Not blurred, not dulled, gone. As if someone had scooped out pieces of his mind and flushed them down into the roots beneath him. He tried to remember Carter Hill, and instead pictured static. He tried to remember the girl in red, and saw only a smudge of color with no context. His own face began to fade in his thoughts. The mirror flickered again, but this time a different face appeared. Mark, eyes bloodshot, face pale, lips trembling, and he was in the same chair, the same room, somewhere else, but connected. Ethan slammed his fists against the arms of the chair.
No!
But Mark began to speak. I'm Mark Elliott Caldwell, born March 3rd, 1990. I remember the old farmhouse in Maine. I remember the mirror. I remember Ethan. I remember. Stop it, Mark, Ethan yelled. Don't say it. Don't give it to them. But the feed continued. Mark's voice broke. I remember the note. The one that said, ask Ethan. I remember thinking it was a joke. I remember how the walls got smaller every time I closed my eyes. I remember something watching me from the keyhole. Ethan began to weep, because he understood now. This was the mechanism. This is how the house moved forward. Not with blood, but with confessions. It swallowed memories and replanted them somewhere else, in someone new. It wasn't enough to trap you. It wanted you to give yourself away, piece by piece, willingly. And now, Mark was being unwritten. The feed cut. The mirror went blank again, and the chair released its grip. Ethan collapsed to the floor, panting, heart thundering. He felt lighter, but not in a good way. Lighter like a balloon with a slow leak, drifting farther from himself. He pushed himself to his feet, legs shaking. Behind him, the wall peeled open. Another hallway, only this one wasn't wet or pulsing. It was dry, dusty, old. A hallway that looked like it belonged in a real house. Oak paneling, faded carpet, yellowed wallpaper, and lined along both sides doors, hundreds of them, each with a nameplate. Some names Ethan recognized, some he didn't. One read Holbrook, Leela, another Ashy, Gregory. Further down, Caldwell Ethan, his name, his door. The doorknob was smooth, polished brass. He stared at it, heart caught in his throat. Then something changed. For the first time since Carter Hill, a choice. He could open it, or he could walk past it. He could become part of the house, or he could keep going. And maybe, just maybe, find where the roots end. Because the house didn't just preserve memories, it hid something. And Ethan was ready to dig deeper. To rip through the walls, to tear through the rot, to find the thing older than the house. The thing the house is afraid of. Because even monsters have nightmares. Even hearts have limits. And Ethan Caldwell was no longer afraid to push past the final door. Ethan stood in front of the door with his name on it. Frozen. Not by fear, not even by the whisper of the house breathing down the hall, but by the sheer familiarity of it. This door didn't snarl like the ones before it. It didn't ooze or pulse or twitch. It looked mundane. A door like any other in a house that might have once held laughter. The brass knob reflected his hollowed face. And the nameplate, Caldwell Ethan J. Shone as if freshly polished, though there was no dust in this part of the house, no time for aging. Just memory, perfectly preserved. And yet he didn't open it, because he knew what it would mean. Opening that door would be acceptance. The final fold. A surrender to what the house had been grooming him to become since day one. Since Carter Hill. Since the first scream in the woods, and the missing Holbrooks, and the mirror that spoke with his voice. All of it had led to this. The moment he chooses to step willingly into his own compartment, take his place in the file of the forgotten, another sealed archive in an endless hallway of selves. But this time the house hesitated. There was no ticking now. No whisper. Only the hum of stale air, the pressure of something deep beneath the floors, coiled tight and listening. Ethan took a step back and turned away, because he wasn't going to give it what it wanted. Not yet. Instead, he kept walking, down the hall, past doors that looked older with each step. The carpet gave way to stone. The wallpaper crumbled, revealing dark timber and blackened brick. Names on the doors began to fade, replaced by symbols, jagged etchings, geometric spirals, and glyphs that pulsed with a coldness no language could contain. These weren't names. They were roots, concepts, essences. The hallway narrowed as he pressed forward, curving slightly like the spine of a sleeping beast. Then, without warning, the floor fell away. Not physically, but perceptually. It was like his feet kept moving. But gravity forgot which direction it belonged to. He stumbled, caught himself against a wall that rippled beneath his palm, and realized he was now standing in a room so black it swallowed thought. No walls, no doors, just space. Until, in the center, a single shape emerged. A chair, wooden, splintered, facing a mirror again. But this mirror was different. It didn't reflect him. It reflected a house. Not the one from Carter Hill. Not the farmhouse in Maine. This was older, colder. A house made of roots and ribs and smoke, built in a world without sun, floating in an abyss of silence. And behind it something moved. Ethan stared, his breath gone, lungs burning with the effort to make sense of what his eyes refused to accept. The thing behind the house had no form. It wasn't a creature, or a god, or even a shadow. It was the absence of presence, a consciousness without face or flesh. The house was just a mask. This was the wearer, the feeder, the source, and it had noticed him. The mirror rippled like disturbed water. The space around Ethan constricted. Then the voice returned, not from the walls, not from the floor, from everywhere. You've walked too far. He tried to speak, but found his voice locked in his throat. You were supposed to stop at your door. That was your ending. That was your purpose. The room trembled. The mirror cracked. And for the first time, Ethan felt it. Not fear, not confusion, but resistance. The house didn't want him here. Not in this room. Not in its room. This was the secret chamber behind the house's heart, the place where memory became flesh and reflection turned to root. No one was supposed to reach it. No name had ever walked this far. Ethan clenched his fists. "I don't want to be part of this," he said. "I don't want to feed you." The room pulsed. "You already have." Images flooded the mirror. Every memory he'd lost, every confession torn from him, every whisper and photograph and hallway and echo. It had all been swallowed, stored, absorbed. Not to destroy him, but to build it. "You're not the house," he said, voice low. "You're the thing that uses it." The mirror began to bleed. Thick, black ichor dripping from the glass, pooling around the chair, and from behind the mirror came a face. His face. But not the younger reflection, not the burned copy from the root chamber. This one was ageless, pale, expressionless, not angry, not afraid, just waiting. A version of Ethan who had accepted everything, who had sat down in the chair, spoken every word, opened every door. A version who had become the house. It raised its hand, and the echo rose with it, like a wave, like a mouth. Ready to swallow, but Ethan didn't move. Not this time. Instead, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the last item he'd brought with him, the golden fang, still warm, still pulsing faintly. The house hated it. He knew that instinctively, because it wasn't just a tool, it was a tooth. And it hadn't come from the house. It had been ripped out. A piece of whatever came before the house. Whatever hurt it. He raised the fang and drove it into the floor. The mirror screamed. The walls splintered. The face shattered into mist. The ichor evaporated in a gust of dry wind. And for a brief, blinding moment, Ethan saw something impossible. A field, sunlight, a house with open doors. Empty, silent, powerless. Then blackness. When he awoke, he was in the hallway again, lying on the floor in front of the door with his name. But this time, the nameplate had changed. It was blank. The brass had tarnished. The doorknob was missing. And from inside, he heard only wind. Not whispers. Not ticking. Just silence. He smiled. Not out of victory, but because, for the first time, the house didn't know what to do next. It had lost the thread, and now, Ethan was going to find out what happened when the house forgets. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was wrong. Too flat. Too still. Like the air had stopped knowing how to carry sound. Ethan stood in front of the blank door where his name used to be, his hand hovering where the knob had once been. The wood was cold. Not like ice, but like something that had never known warmth. A vacancy. And it struck him then. The house didn't just lose his name. It had erased it. That was the first real victory. Not an escape, not freedom, but a crack in the spine of something ancient, something that had been perfect for too long. A chink in the armor, because the house, for all its rituals, all its games and mirrors and mouths, had one flaw: it remembered everything. That was its strength. And now, because of him, it had begun to forget. The hallway around him dimmed. Not from lack of light, but from something deeper. An unraveling. Like the house had lost its thread and didn't know how to stitch itself anymore. The wallpaper sagged. The floorboards groaned not with menace, but with uncertainty, like a stage whose actors forgot their lines. The doors behind him began to hum, and he heard it in their warbling vibration. Confusion. The house was trying to rebuild his story, searching for the words he had stolen. He walked away from his door. Down the corridor, faster now, while the house scrambled to catch up. Doors blinked in and out of existence as he passed. Some cracked open to reveal frozen versions of rooms he'd never seen, as though the house were generating filler content to delay him. He passed one door and saw a hospital bed, his body in it, machines beeping, doctors shaking their heads. Another door showed him a quiet field with a single oak tree, a noose swinging gently from a branch. Lies. Fabricated exits. Narrative traps. The house was panicking, and the farther he walked, the less the architecture held together. Hallways collapsed into staircases. Staircases curved into upside, down attics that opened into kitchens with no floors. The space folded like paper, trying to coral him, trying to make sense of him. But it couldn't. Because Ethan no longer fit into its logic. He wasn't a confession anymore. He was a gap. And the house didn't know what to do with a gap. Finally, the structure gave up trying to guide him. It opened. Fully. He stepped through a crumbling doorway and found himself in a circular chamber that breathed like a dying thing. Roots hung slack from the ceiling. The walls pulsed faintly. A great mirror stood cracked down the center, its surface warping in real time. The heartbeat of the house, wounded, confused, and afraid. And in the center of the room stood the archivist. He'd never seen it before, but he knew instantly. The thing that had written the names. That had indexed every pain and memory the house devoured. A tall, pale figure made of bone and paper, its skin covered in inked script that twisted and rewrote itself as it moved. Its face was blank. But when it turned to him, it read him like a page. "You are unmarked," it rasped. "That is not allowed." Ethan stepped closer. "It is now." The archivist tilted its head. "We cannot store what you do not give. You have no record, no placement. I know. You are without context. That's the point." It reached out a long, ink-dripping finger and pointed toward the cracked mirror. "Step through. Be named again. The house will restore your pattern. You will be rewritten." "No," Ethan said softly. "I'm not a character anymore. I'm not a page. I'm a tear in the book." The mirror pulsed. The crack down its center split wider, groaning as it splintered. "You will dissolve," the archivist warned. "Outside the story, there is only nothing." Ethan reached into his pocket and pulled out the golden fang. It was still warm, still alive. The last piece of something older than this place. He held it up. "I'd rather be nothing than this." The archivist screamed. Not with sound, with words. Pages tore loose from its skin, flying in spirals, each one soaked in ink and memory, burning the air with phrases like "laughter in the hallway," "third door," "always locked," "blood under the crib." The house convulsed. The floor cracked, and Ethan threw the fang into the broken mirror. The moment it struck, the room inverted. Not exploded. Unwound, like a story being read backward at impossible speed. Walls peeled into flat surfaces, which then folded into thin paper, which then burst into black ash and scattered. The archivist let out a final shudder and crumpled like a burned book, its pages curling into dust. The roots on the ceiling shriveled. The breath of the house, always behind the walls, always rising, stopped. Ethan stood alone. No ticking, no mirrors, just silence. But this time it felt real. He closed his eyes, and for a moment he felt himself vanish. Not die, not fade, just untether. As if his story had slipped through the house's fingers and fallen outside its reach. He was no longer a chapter. Not a name. Not even a whisper in the walls. He was forgotten. And in the strange weightlessness that followed, in the quiet place beyond story and structure, he heard a sound. Footsteps. He opened his eyes and saw someone walking toward him. A girl, young, familiar, red dress, but her mouth was no longer sewn shut, and her eyes were full of fire. She stopped a few feet away. "You made it past the house," she said. Her voice was quiet, but it didn't echo. It just was. "You know who I am?" Ethan asked. She nodded. "I'm the one it couldn't keep, the first root that didn't grow." Leela. Her smile was sad. "I used to be. But that name is buried." He swallowed. "So what now?" She stepped closer. "Now," she said, "we find the others. The ones still trapped in their pages. The ones who don't know they're being read." Ethan looked around the void. Dark, vast, strange. He felt the emptiness behind him and the possibility ahead. A place without teeth or ticking, but full of echoes. He nodded and stepped forward. Because the house had forgotten him, but he would never forget what it had done. The void wasn't cold. That was the first surprise. It wasn't warm either. It simply existed, a vast stretch of space where time had lost its definition and reality had unstitched itself from cause and effect. No up, no down. No air, yet Ethan could breathe. No light, yet he could see. But not with his eyes, not exactly. It was as if the idea of seeing remained intact, even though the usual rules had burned away when the mirror shattered and the house forgot his name. He walked beside the girl in the red dress, or the one who had once been Lila Holbrook. Her steps didn't make a sound. She moved like someone who had walked this place for years, as if she'd learned how to float just inches above the nightmare, immune to its hunger. Her presence didn't comfort him. Not exactly, but it steadied him like an anchor tied not to safety, but to purpose. "You were the first," Ethan said, watching her face in the half-glow of this impossible place. "No," she replied. "I was just the first who woke up." He didn't ask what that meant. Not yet. Because something about the way she said it suggested he'd find out soon enough. They passed fragments floating in the dark. Broken walls, curled floorboards, the jagged skeleton of staircases that led nowhere. The remnants of other houses. Ethan saw a piece of the Carter Hill banister drifting upside down in the air. A broken teacup he remembered knocking over on day 3. A photo of him at age 12, half charred, suspended in space like it had always belonged there. Each object throbbed with the echo of memory. Not his anymore, not entirely, just leftovers. Bones of the story that had once chewed on his soul. "Where are we going?" he asked finally. Leela turned her eyes toward him. To the roots, he felt a tightness in his chest. "I thought we passed them." "In the lower chambers." "No," she said. "Those were feeders. Proxies. Pieces. Not the root. The house you saw was a branch. One of many. The roots go deeper. They grow through." "Through what?" She stopped walking and pointed. Ahead, something flickered. A light, faint, flickering like a dying lantern. As they drew closer, Ethan saw it wasn't a lantern at all. It was a room. Or the memory of one, stretched thin, flickering between existence and oblivion. A child's bedroom. Blue wallpaper with stars. A shelf of stuffed animals. A bed with a small figure curled beneath the covers. He stepped into it, cautiously feeling the static buzz of fragile memory on his skin. It itched. The air here smelled like childhood. Sugar and crayons and dust warmed by the sun. "Whose room is this?" he whispered. Leela said nothing. So Ethan approached the bed. The figure under the blankets was still, facing the wall. He reached out, pulled the covers gently. It was a boy, no older than 7. His eyes were closed. But he wasn't sleeping. Not really, he was looping. His lips moved slowly, mouthing the same phrase again and again. "Don't open the red door. Don't open the red door. Don't open the..." Ethan stepped back. "He's still dreaming," Lila said, her voice flat. The house fed on his story and left him looping. Some dreams never finish. Some victims become fuel. Ethan's throat tightened. "How many are there?" Leela nodded toward the dark, and then Ethan saw them. Thousands of rooms, thousands of flickering lights. Each one a fragment, a scene, a story that had never ended properly. A woman trapped in a bathtub, frozen mid-scream. A man standing at a window for eternity, never able to turn away. A child counting the cracks in the ceiling forever, convinced that stopping will kill her family. Lives held in perfect dread, because fear, the house had learned, was most potent when it never ended. They were all still dreaming, and the house still fed on them, even after forgetting Ethan. Even after the crack he'd punched through its skin, the root still held the others tight. "Can we wake them?" he asked. Leela shook her head. "Not directly. The house protects them. Every dream is guarded by memory loops, pain loops. You can't break them by force, only from the inside." Ethan clenched his fists. "Then I'll go inside." "You're not ready," she said. "I don't care." "You should," she said, quietly. "Because if you go in too soon, you become the loop. The house writes around you. You won't just be forgotten again. You'll be remembered wrong." He looked down at the boy in the bed, at the whispered warning about the red door, at the thin sweat on the child's skin, the way his fingers twitched in a rhythm that matched the ticking Ethan had once heard inside his own bones. "How do I get in?" he asked. Leela pointed again. At the base of the bedroom, where the floor peeled back like soft bark. Beneath it, a root, dark, smooth, pulsing softly. "A vein," she said. "Touch it, and it will let you in. But only if you're vulnerable enough to be reshaped." Ethan stepped toward it. "Wait," Lila said. "You need something first." He turned. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a piece of fabric. Red, torn. One of her old ribbons. "I used to wear it," she said, looking away. "When I was still real. Before the house took my name and made me into something it couldn't fully consume." He took it carefully. The moment his fingers touched the ribbon, he felt cold. But not from the fabric, from the flood of memories it unlocked. Her laughter, her screams. The closet, the silence that followed. The truth that she had been the first one to refuse the loop, to hide her pain so deep the house couldn't find it. The ribbon was her anchor. Now it would be his. He crouched, pressed his palm to the root, and closed his eyes. The bedroom dissolved. The void swallowed him whole, and the dream took him. He opened his eyes inside the boy's room again, but this time as part of it. The light flickered. The wallpaper peeled. The toys whispered. The loop had accepted him, and somewhere beyond the window, Ethan heard it. The sound he hadn't heard since the confession room. The ticking had started again, but not from the house. From him. Because he wasn't just inside the dream now. He was the infection inside its skin. The forgotten echo with a name that couldn't be archived. And if he played this right, he'd make the house choke on its own story. It started with a whisper, soft and rhythmic, circling Ethan like a lullaby soaked in static. The boy's room had changed. Not drastically. The stars on the wallpaper were now slightly out of place, some upside down, some dripping as if painted in ink instead of glow in the dark paint. The stuffed animals on the shelf no longer faced forward, but turned inward, staring at the wall as though ashamed of something they'd witnessed one too many times. And beneath the bed, something ticked. Not like a clock, but like a wound that wouldn't clot. Ethan had slipped into the loop seamlessly, just as Leela warned. The boy didn't seem to notice him standing there. His lips still moved in that same helpless cadence. "Don't open the red door. Don't open the red door. Don't," over and over, like his soul had been shackled to a sentence he couldn't finish. And Ethan knew. In that eerie part of his mind that had been reshaped by the house, that the loop wouldn't break until someone did open the red door. The one the boy feared. The one he warned about endlessly. But the cruel trick of the loop was this: opening the door freed him. But at a cost. The loop always demanded a replacement, a new fear, and Ethan had walked in willingly. He sat on the edge of the bed, watching the boy sleep, twitch, and mumble. The ribbon Leela gave him was tied tight around his wrist. A pulse of memory beat faintly through the fabric, like her will still lingered there, stubborn and burning. That ribbon was the only thing keeping his mind from blending fully into the dream, from becoming another hollow echo sealed in a child's nightmare. He stood up. The room groaned. Not loudly, just enough to let him know the house was aware again, not fully awake, but stirring, like something ancient rolling in its grave of roots. He crossed the room toward the closet, where he knew, without being told, that the red door waited. It wasn't visible at first. The closet looked like any other. White sliding doors. Brass handles. But as he gripped the handle, his fingers began to burn. The metal hissed against his skin, and his breath caught in his throat as a sharp scent filled the air. Wet soil, old wood, and copper. The house's blood. The closet door slid open, revealing darkness, but not emptiness. There within the black was the door, red, simple, too red. It hurt to look at directly, like it had been painted in liquefied alarm. No knob, just a single peephole rimmed with tiny, jagged teeth. Ethan leaned in slowly, and the door blinked. A vertical slit across the middle opened and shut like a nictitating membrane. Not a door, but an eye. Watching him. Reacting. Behind him, the boy whimpered. Ethan didn't turn around, because the loop had shifted, just slightly. The boy wasn't saying the line anymore. He was humming. The same tune Ethan had heard in the hallway with the nameplates. A soft, off-key lullaby. The sound of a mind dissolving in slow, rhythmic horror. He reached into his pocket, fingers brushing the edge of the ribbon again. The moment he touched it, he remembered Lila's voice, "Don't let it rename you." That's how it starts. Once you take its name, it never lets go. Ethan pressed his palm to the red door. It pulsed beneath his touch. Then it opened. There was no creak, no dramatic rumble. It simply vanished, peeled backward like wet paper. Beyond it was another room, smaller, circular. The walls were lined with photographs, but they weren't hanging. They breathed. Each photo expanded and contracted, as if alive, pulsing with their own hidden clocks. In the center of the room was a crib. Inside the crib, something moved. Ethan stepped closer. The photos whispered around him as he passed. He recognized his own face in a few. Then Mark's. Then his parents. Lila. But their mouths had all been erased, scrubbed away violently. Every photo, every person, all mute, as if the house had stolen their ability to warn, to scream, to speak. He reached the crib and looked inside, and for the second time since entering Glenshade, his knees almost gave out. The crib held a mirror. Not a baby, not a blanket, just a mirror. Curved and cracked, its surface foggy with condensation. But the reflection, it wasn't his. It was the boy, eyes wide, staring, but mouth open in silent warning. But it wasn't a reflection from now. It was from before. From outside the loop, Ethan stepped back, and the mirror followed. Literally, it rose from the crib on a coiled stalk of root and sinew, standing eye, level with him now, bending slightly like a curious serpent. It shimmered, and then it spoke, not with voice, but with feeling. A deep, bone-shaking pressure inside his skull, like his own thoughts turning against him. He gave us the fear. Now you must give us the name. Ethan clenched his jaw. No, the door must be fed. You opened it. You tricked him. A child. You made his nightmare into a rule. We kept him safe. By looping his fear forever. By making his fear useful. The mirror surged forward. Ethan raised the ribbon like a blade. The moment the fabric touched the surface, the mirror recoiled, screeching. Not in sound, but in fractured glass. Its image rippled. The stalk supporting it began to burn, curling back into the crib. "You're not the root," Ethan whispered. "You're just the mouth." The room quaked. Photos began to peel off the wall and screamed as they crumbled. The loop was ending. The house was trying to erase the dream to trap him inside. Ethan sprinted back through the door. The boy in the bed sat upright, eyes wide. "You opened it?" "I closed it again," Ethan said. The boy blinked, and for the first time his lips didn't move. The loop had broken. The stars on the wallpaper began to brighten. The toys turned their heads forward again. The floor stopped breathing. The room exhaled. And just like that, the boy vanished. Not violently, not painfully, just freed. The room folded inward like a completed page, and Ethan stood once more in the void. Alone, but not really, because above him now, high in the endless black, lights began to flicker. Other rooms, other echoes, and one by one, Ethan knew he could reach them. Each loop he entered, each memory he freed, he weakened the house. And somewhere down that long path of rooms and roots was Mark, still dreaming, still waiting, and Ethan was going to get him back. The second loop didn't wait for permission. It swallowed Ethan whole. One moment he was standing in the void, heart still rattling from the red door and the broken child's whisper, and the next he was inside paint. Not a room, not a house, a painting. A giant canvas, stretching skyward in impossible verticals, like someone had melted a memory and smeared it across the walls of the universe. The colors bled around him. Deep greens, choked blues, a sickly shade of gray that kept shifting, as if it were trying to remember what color it used to be. And somewhere within that rotting swirl, he saw a familiar face. Mark, but not the version from the real world. Not the Mark who'd called him in the middle of the night, whispering about dreams and dead things, and the ticking in the walls. This Mark was painted. His movements unnatural, jittering like old film. His smile was wrong, held too long. Too wide. He sat at a dinner table that never ended, a long rectangle stretching into blackness, lined with dozens of identical plates. No food, no silverware. Just a single candle flickering in front of each seat. Mark sat at the head, wearing a suit Ethan had never seen before. It was elegant, regal, and smeared at the sleeves with something dark. He didn't look up, didn't speak, didn't blink. But Ethan felt his attention. This loop was a trap. Not passive like the child's nightmare, predatory. Crafted not just to feed the house, but to fight back. The house had learned from the breach. It was adapting, building defenses inside its own infection. Mark, Ethan stepped closer. The paint beneath his feet wrinkled like skin. Mark's head turned, too far, too slow. The neck rotated until it cracked, revealing a line of brushstrokes beneath his jaw. When he finally spoke, his voice wasn't his. He left me at the door. Ethan froze. What? He left me. He promised, and he lied. I waited. I'm almighty. The last word shattered like glass. The candles on the table flared, then went out one by one, plunging the space into deep, inky twilight. Mark stood. The back of his suit dripped. Paint, at first glance. But Ethan could smell it. Not oil, not acrylic. Blood. The scene twisted. The table convulsed, turning into a hallway made of paintings. Each frame on the walls showed a different version of Mark. One screaming in a locked closet. One sitting alone in a hospital bed. One digging something out of the dirt with bleeding hands. The hallway forced Ethan forward. The floor pushed him like a conveyor belt. He passed frame after frame, each more broken, more desperate. A memory stabbed into him. Mark.
How did it happen?
During their last call, saying, "It's like I've been replaced, like there's another me in the mirror, and he's the one breathing." Now Ethan understood. This wasn't just a loop. This was Mark's undoing. The house hadn't trapped him in a memory. It had trapped him in identity decay. A spiral where every version of him pulled away from the last, until nothing was left but shadow. Ethan broke into a run. The hallway twisted into a spiral staircase made of canvases. Each step cracked beneath him. As he climbed, the portraits began to speak. "You should have come sooner. You forgot him. You let him rot. You're not real either." Ethan reached the top, a landing with no rail, no door, just an easel, and on the easel, a painting. Fresh, incomplete, of Mark. But in this one, his face was missing. Only the suit, the hair, the shadow of a jaw. But the eyes, they were holes, literally, painted voids. Black pits that drew the light around them inward. As Ethan stared, the easel began to shake, and the paint moved. Not dripped, not ran, moved. Like it was trying to finish the face, trying to complete the trap. Ethan reached for the ribbon again. But the moment his fingers touched it, the paint lunged. It didn't splash, it bit. A tendril of gray lashed out from the canvas and wrapped around his wrist, pulling him forward. Another grabbed his ankle, then his throat. The painting was absorbing him, trying to fold him in as the missing face, to replace Mark. Because the house had learned a new trick. Don't just trap the dreamer. Reassign the dream. He was becoming the portrait. A smear in someone else's memory. A ghost painted in. His lungs burned. The grip on his throat tightened. And then, a flicker. The ribbon. Lila's ribbon. It glowed, only faintly, but enough. He whipped his wrist upward, slamming the ribbon into the canvas. The effect was instant. The painting screamed. The brushstrokes unraveled. The face splintered, and the black holes in the eyes sucked inward, devouring the rest of the painting until it collapsed into a single frame of cracked glass and ash. Ethan hit the ground hard, coughing. The stairway was gone, the hallway gone, the canvas world gone. He knelt in a field of black and smoke, and next to him was Mark. Real, alive, breathing. His eyes fluttered open, and the first thing he did was sob. Not in pain, in relief. "Ethan," he croaked. "I got you," Ethan whispered, grabbing his brother's arm. Mark shook violently. It was me and not me. They kept showing me what I could have been. What I should have been. They made me watch myself fade. Ethan helped him to his feet. "It's over." Mark looked around. "Where are we?" "Outside the loops," Ethan said. "Outside the story." Mark stared at him. "You got out?" Ethan nodded. "I broke the mirror." Mark swallowed. "Then you already know," he whispered. "What's below it all? What grows underneath?" Ethan felt the chill crawl up his spine. Because yes, he did. And it wasn't done yet. Because as the void flickered around them, a sound began to rise. Not the ticking, not the whispering, but a growl, low, guttural, older than memory, older than fear. The house was waking up. Not the version above, not the one with roots and mirrors, but the first house, the one they built the others around, the one no one had ever reached. Until now. Ethan looked at Mark, and Mark nodded. Because now they had a new mission. Burn it to the ground. The void wasn't empty anymore. It shuddered beneath their feet like the belly of a living thing disturbed from ancient slumber. The once weightless air had thickened, every breath now dragging with it the scent of scorched wood, old roots, and something sore. Like spoiled milk and secrets left to rot, Ethan and Mark stood together, brothers reunited by horror, now facing something far worse than memory loops or mirrored Depelge Ingers. Because beneath the fractured dreams, under the forgotten names and corrupted hallways, lay something deeper. Something that didn't just feed on stories, but birthed them. The original engine of the house. The first root. The one that blood. They didn't speak, because there were no words heavy enough to balance the weight of what pulsed below. Instead, they walked, not by choice, but by pull, as though the space beneath them had become a slow, invisible current, guiding them downward, one step at a time. The black beneath their feet thinned, revealing a slick surface of petrified wood wrapped in veins that pulsed in rhythm with an unseen heart. The void had shape now. A descending tunnel, and at its end a door. Not red, not brass. This one was made of skin. Human skin sewn together with jagged wire, etched with names that had long since faded to ash. It breathed, a slow, sick rise and fall, with every exhale. The tunnel around them moaned, not loud, but long and mournful, like the world itself was remembering something it wished it had never known. Mark swallowed hard, his voice breaking the silence. "This is the source, isn't it?" Ethan nodded. The others were masks. "This is its face." The door didn't resist them. It opened before their hands could touch it, peeling back like a scab, revealing stairs made of bone that spiraled into nothingness. The air changed again, wet, dense, and loud, dripping, a constant, methodical drip, as if something unseen was leaking endlessly beneath the house's foundation. As they descended, they passed objects embedded into the bone walls, eyeglasses bent in half, scorched wedding rings, watches forever stuck at 3:17 a.m., children's shoes still stained with mud. These weren't symbols. These were remnants. The real things. Artifacts of the people the house had devoured, and every one of them pulsed faintly, as if still connected to the echoes above. At the bottom of the spiral, the space opened into a chamber so massive it didn't make sense. Too wide, too high. The kind of size that broke your brain if you stared too long. A cathedral without light. But something glowed in the center. A massive tree, dead yet alive. Its bark was blackened and split, oozing a thick red sap that dripped into a pit below it. The roots of the tree weren't buried. They hung in the air, swaying gently, wrapped in human hair and broken mirrors. Some of the roots were tied into nooses. Others had mouths that whispered nonsense on repeat, soft babble that curled around Ethan's ears and threatened to infect his thoughts. But it wasn't the tree that horrified him most. It was what hung from it. People. Dozens of them, strung up like ornaments, mouths sewn shut, eyes wide open. arms stretched as if in permanent surrender. Their bodies didn't decay, they twitched, they breathed. They were alive, trapped in stasis, feeding the thing beneath them. Mark backed up, nearly tripping over a fragment of bone. What the hell is this? Ethan didn't answer, because he saw something familiar hanging near the base of the tree. A woman, red hair matted to her scalp, dress torn, ribbons dangling from her wrist. Leela, he whispered. She wasn't dead, but her body twitched unnaturally, like a marionette whose strings were pulled by a drunk god. Her head jerked toward him, eyes locking with his. No sound came from her sewn lips, but her expression said everything. Run. A noise echoed through the chamber then, not the drip, not the whisper. A voice. Low, male, but ancient, and it came from everywhere. You broke the loop. You let them go. You burned their names. Ethan turned toward the base of the tree, where the roots thickened into a trunk that bent downward into the pit. Something moved beneath the surface. Not a creature, not a person, a presence. The original author, the one who first learned how to build a house out of pain. And it was angry. We fed you. We gave you purpose. We wrote you in. And now you seek to erase. Mark stepped forward, voice shaking. She's still alive. We have to get her down. Ethan grabbed his shoulder. No, not yet. He didn't know how he knew, but he knew touching one of the hanging dreamers would trigger the root's defense. A reflex of violence. The house would collapse the moment it knew its deepest prey had been reached. But there was another way. In his pocket, the ribbon burned. Leela's last gift, still humming with defiance. Ethan pulled it out, walked to the pit, and dropped it in. The reaction was instant. The ground shook, the whispers stopped, and the tree screamed. Not in words, in loss, in rage, because the ribbon was memory, pure, raw memory that refused to be twisted. By dropping it into the heart of the original root, Ethan had introduced something the house couldn't digest: truth. The roots recoiled. The bodies shook violently. The red sap turned black, and from the pit, something rose. It wasn't shaped like a man or an animal. It was story, given flesh. All the fear, all the repetition, all the pain the house had ever consumed. A monstrous college of unfinished sentences and half-forgotten trauma, crawling with eyes, mouths, and hands that grasped but never held. It stared at Ethan with every face it had ever worn, and spoke one final time. We will remember you differently. Then it lunged. Ethan didn't run. Neither did Mark. They stood their ground as the beast charged, and then collapsed, screaming, its body folding inward, swallowed by the very truth it had tried so hard to suppress. It wasn't invincible. It wasn't God. It was just a story, and stories could be ended. The chamber cracked. Light poured in. The bodies began to drop gently from the branches. Leela first. Her stitches vanished. Her eyes closed, peaceful. Then others, one by one. All the names forgotten. All the people broken and looped and twisted. Released. The house above began to collapse. And Ethan, for the first time, didn't fear it, because the root was dead, and the dream was ending. He grabbed Mark's arm. Together, they stepped into the rising light, not through a door, not through a mirror, but through truth. And behind them, the house that blood finally died. The sunlight didn't feel real. It touched their skin, sure, and warmed the backs of their necks as they emerged from the collapsing dreamscape. But it felt like it had been too long. Like warmth had become a foreign language neither of them could fully understand. Ethan blinked at the sky. Blue, cloudless, with birds carving lazy circles overhead. Mark stumbled beside him, squinting as though trying to recognize the very concept of daylight. The world hadn't changed, but they had. They'd come back hollowed out and filled again with something strange and sharp clarity. The field where Carter Hill once stood was empty now. Not abandoned, erased. No rubble, no basement, no foundation. Just tall grass swaying in the breeze, moving like fingers trying to forget what they once held. Ethan walked to the spot where the porch used to be, half expecting to hear the creak of rotten wood or the groan of settling floorboards. Nothing. Not even birdsong touched that circle of grass. Nature was growing again, yes, but around the place, not through it. As if the earth still hesitated, remembering the house's weight, Mark broke the silence first. "Do you feel it?" Ethan nodded.
Yeah.
"It's quieter. Not just that, lighter, like something's been lifted. It had. They'd ended it. Not just the loop or the fragments or the mirrored rooms, but the engine, the pulse at the bottom of the myth. The original womb. The place where the house first learned to feed. And now that root had withered, unable to hold shape against the truth Ethan poured into it. The house didn't die in fire. It didn't scream in its final breath. It simply let go. Like a story that had finally run out of ink. Leela sat under a tree at the edge of the field, knees pulled to her chest, arms wrapped tight around them. Her dress was still torn, hair still tangled, but her eyes were clear, not just awake, free. For a long moment, none of them spoke. Mark crouched beside her slowly, unsure if he was stepping into a new silence or someone else's memory. "You made it out," she said, her voice rough but steady. "So did you," Mark replied. She gave a tired smile. "Not all of me." Ethan sat across from her. Enough. They stayed there for a while. 3 survivors caught in the strange gravity of absence. No wind, no buzz of insects. Just the knowledge that something terrible no longer lived where it used to. Eventually, Leela stood and brushed dirt from her legs. "There are others," she said. "Other houses. Other stories built the same way." Ethan looked at her, already knowing what she meant. "You felt them too." She nodded. "When I was hung from that tree, I could hear them. Places like Carter Hill, buried in people's lives, hidden in cities, apartments, basements, attics. The house was just one head of the creature. There's more." Mark winced. "But we destroyed the root." "We destroyed a root," she corrected. "The oldest, maybe. But something else always tries to grow in its place." Ethan's throat dried. "Then it's not over." "No," she said. "It's quieter. But not over." Silence fell again. But it wasn't the terrifying kind. It wasn't a trap. It was the silence of people standing at the edge of something bigger than themselves, staring into it with open eyes and knowing they had a choice. They could leave, go back to their lives, try to patch themselves together, pretend the nightmare hadn't unspooled their minds and stitched them back with haunted thread. Or they could keep going, not chasing the horror, hunting it. Ethan stood. "If there are others, we find them." Mark raised an eyebrow. "You sure?" "No," Ethan admitted. "But it's what we do now. We know what to look for. The echoes. The loops. The rooms that never change. If we don't go after them, who will?" Leela's eyes burned with that old fire again. The one that helped her survive inside the house, even as it tried to grind her into nothing. She nodded. "We don't save places," she said. "We save people from being forgotten inside them." They walked from the field in silence. Not because they had nothing to say, but because the next chapter didn't need words yet. It needed movement. It needed them to step forward. And behind them, grass grew. The earth sighed, and where the house once stood, nothing remained but the memory of fear, and the people who refused to be devoured by it. They drove for hours, not chasing anything in particular but following the silence, listening for where it stopped. Cities passed like blurs in the windshield. Towns blinked in and out like skipped frames in a film reel until one evening, with dusk bleeding through a violet sky, Ethan felt it again. That prickling behind the teeth, a pressure just behind the eyes, a silence that was too silent. It pulled them off the interstate and into a neighborhood so ordinary it felt staged. Rows of identical houses, freshly mowed lawns, wind chimes too still. A place that pretended to be perfect, but stank of something hidden. Hanover Street. There was no sign, no obvious rot. But Ethan knew. Mark did too. The way the streetlights flickered just before they passed under them. The way a bird turned mid-flight and dropped dead in the street. The house they stopped in front of was 2 stories, vinyl siding, plastic flamingos on the lawn. But the second window from the right had been painted black from the inside. That's where the silence ended. Leela waited in the car. She didn't speak, just looked at the house with a narrowed stare, as if measuring its breath. Ethan and Mark approached. No broken lock, no creaking door. The place invited them in, as if it had been waiting. The living room was clean, too clean. Not a speck of dust, not a book out of place. But the air was heavy and wrong. It wasn't stale, exactly. It was still breathing. The TV was on, playing static that flickered between images too fast to register a hand reaching, a mouth stitched shut, a child blinking backward. "Someone's here," Mark whispered. They moved deeper inside. At the end of the hallway was a door. Not locked, just slightly ajar. Enough to show that same tar black window from the street view. Inside, a young woman sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the wall. Her mouth didn't move, her eyes didn't blink, but she was alive. The clock above her bed read 3:17 a.m. It didn't tick, it didn't move. The air in the room buzzed like teeth chattering beneath the skin of the walls. Ethan took a step forward, and she spoke. But not to them. "Don't talk to them," she said. A second later, she turned, looked straight at him. "They're not really here. They wear your face until they learn your fear. Then they take your voice." Her eyes welled up and tears slid down her cheeks in absolute silence. "I stopped talking 3 weeks ago," she whispered. "That's why they haven't figured me out yet." Mark stepped back. "She's not looped," he said quietly. "She's resisting." Ethan nodded, but not for long, because in the far corner of the room, barely visible in the shadow, something was watching. Not a shape, not even eyes, just pressure, waiting for the girl to break, waiting for the moment it could step into her skin. Ethan reached into his pocket, but the ribbon was gone. Used. Burned in the roots of Carter Hill. He looked at Mark, who held nothing but fists and fire in his eyes. They couldn't fight this one with memories. They needed a new weapon. "What's your name?" Ethan asked. The girl shook her head violently. "If I tell you, they'll know it too." "Not us. Not out loud." "Write it?" She hesitated, then slowly reached under her mattress, pulling out a small notebook. Every page had been filled with drawings. Her family, her house. Each version twisted in some way. Faces too long, shadows climbing up through the floor, hands where there shouldn't be hands. But the last page was blank. She took a pen and wrote 4 letters AVA. That name, that single act of writing it down, cracked something. The air split, the walls shook. The shadow in the corner screamed. Because a name freely given isn't just identity, it's armor. Ava looked at Ethan and whispered, "Now you have to use it." And before he could ask how, she opened her mouth wide and sang. Not beautifully, not on pitch, but with force. Her voice cut through the house like a blade. The shadow shrieked, withdrawing. The black on the window peeled away, like burnt plastic. The clock exploded. The TV shut off. The house roared. A desperate, angry sound. It began to peel itself apart. Walls retracted. Furniture cracked. Floorboards lifted. As if the house had been caught mid-disguise and didn't know what to become anymore. Mark grabbed Ava. "We've got to go!" They ran, the house screaming behind them, mirrors bursting, pictures falling, whispers chasing them like claws. They burst into the street. Leela was already waiting outside the car. "It's awake," she said. Ava collapsed into her arms, and then the house, it didn't collapse. It froze. Frozen mid-scream, half open, half alive, as if caught between worlds and unable to choose one. Because Ava's voice had burned its bridge, and now it had nowhere to run. Ethan stared at the house, and the silence returned. Not oppressive, not heavy. Just aware. "We didn't finish it," Mark said. "No," Ethan replied, "but we stopped it from finishing her. And in this new war, that was enough for today." It didn't end with Ava. That was the first thing Ethan learned after Hanover Street. Saving her was a victory, yes, but it wasn't the end. The house hadn't collapsed. It hadn't faded into dust or screamed itself into silence. It paused. Like a story unsure whether the page should turn, waiting for someone to either close the book or keep reading. And that hesitation, that was the danger, because stories that don't end start mutating, they warp, grow teeth in places they shouldn't. And the house, now wounded, was hungry for resolution. For days they stayed in a motel room just outside town, Ava asleep in the second bed, her breath shallow and twitchy, like someone dreaming through barbed wire. Ethan sat at the window, eyes fixed on nothing. He could still feel the pull from Hanover, like a tug at the base of his spine. The house wanted something, not revenge, not fear, recognition. It wanted to be remembered. "It's not feeding anymore," Mark said one morning, rubbing sleep from his eyes. "It's adapting. You saw how it didn't fall, how it froze." That wasn't panic, that was planning. Ethan didn't answer. He didn't need to, because he had seen something just before they escaped the house. In the shadows, carved into the wall beneath the painted window. A phrase, scribbled backward, only visible once the room cracked open. "I remember you too." At first, he thought it was Ava's, but her eyes went wide when he mentioned it, her head shaking in silent horror. "That's what it told me," she whispered. "Right before I stopped talking, so the house remembered them. Not just Ethan or Mark or Leela. It remembered everyone. All the victims. All the stories. All the fears it had once looped and swallowed. And now that it had been interrupted, it was trying to retell itself. But it couldn't do it alone. It needed people, witnesses, survivors. It needed an audience. And that's when Ethan finally understood they weren't just hunting houses anymore. The houses had started following them too. It began small. The motel phone ringing in the middle of the night, but when they picked up, it wasn't static. It was laughter. Children, then crying, then silence. The vending machine dropping snacks without coins. Every package containing the same broken watch face, each one stuck at 3:17 a.m. And then, worst of all, Ava sleepwalking. Every night, at exactly 3:17. Always toward the door. Always whispering the same phrase over and over. "Please remember me." On the third night, Ethan couldn't take it anymore. He followed her out. Down the hall. Out past the parking lot. Into the cornfield that bordered the edge of the property. The fog was thick, but she walked through it like she knew it. Like it belonged to her. That's where he saw it. A door. Standing alone in the field, unattached to any wall. Just there, waiting, wooden, slightly cracked, and behind it a faint glow. Ava reached for the knob. "No," Ethan said sharply, grabbing her arm. Her head turned, too slow, and for a breathless moment, her eyes weren't hers. They were glass, reflective, shining back his own face. Then she blinked. "Where?" "You were sleepwalking again," he said. "You led us here." She turned toward the door. "It's a new one, isn't it?" Ethan nodded slowly. "Or maybe it's the old one, trying again, retelling itself." The door pulsed. The wood seemed to breathe, and from the crack something smiled. Not with lips, but with understanding. Because now the house didn't just want to trap stories. It wanted to tell them, to spread, like an infection passed through whispered memory. You didn't have to live inside it anymore. You just had to remember it. That was the danger. Not the loops. Not the shadows, but the retelling. Because what happens when a haunted house learns how to haunt without walls? Ethan backed away. "We can't open it." Ava was trembling. "But it's calling someone." "I don't think it's me this time." They returned to the motel in silence. The next morning, Mark was gone, his bed untouched. No note, no sound, only the clock blinking 3:17. Again, the house had learned a new trick, and this time it hadn't needed to knock. It had been invited in. There was no car missing, no door left open, no sign of a struggle. Just that cursed red 3:17 blinking from the corner of the motel room and the quiet vacuum of Mark's absence. It didn't make sense. Ethan had sat awake most of the night, mind racing, ears tuned to every creak and sigh in the building. he would have heard a door, a step, something. But there was nothing. Mark was simply gone, as if he'd been written out. Ethan tore through the room, flipping the mattress, pulling open drawers, half expecting to find one of those broken watches again, or worse, a note. But there was no trace, no farewell. Only the faintest echo of something forgotten pressing into the air like humidity before a storm. Ava sat on the floor by the window, knees pulled to her chest, rocking slightly, eyes locked on something only she could see. "He was invited," she said softly. "You heard it too. The door in the field. The smile. That wasn't meant for me. It was his turn." Ethan's voice cracked. He wouldn't just walk in. Ava's eyes flicked to him. "No, but he wouldn't resist if he thought you were in danger. If it called to him in your voice." The idea hit Ethan so hard it made his knees buckle. The house wasn't just evolving. It was mimicking now. It had learned how to speak like them, to pull them back with echoes of their own fear, their own guilt. Mark had been fighting from the moment they stepped foot in Carter Hill. He'd seen himself replaced, mirrored, warped, and he never shook the feeling that he'd left part of himself behind. Now it made sense. He had. And the house had waited patiently until it knew he'd come looking. Ethan didn't sleep. He drove back to the field the next day. Alone. No sign of the door, no crack in the grass, just wind and memory. But he could feel it, that pull again, not strong, not loud, just steady, like a current under the surface of the world, tugging at his ribs. The motel phone rang again that night. Ethan let it ring, 8 times, 9. Then he picked it up, static. Then a voice. "Ethan, I'm not sure I'm still me." It was Mark. His voice sounded warped, like a cassette that had been left in the sun. Slow stretched. But it was him. "You're in there," Ethan said. "I can pull you out." "No," Mark said. "This one, it's not like the others. It doesn't loop. It rewrites. Every second, I'm less me. It's not trapping my memories. It's replacing them. My childhood. You. Leela. It's all blurring." Ethan closed his eyes. "Tell me what it looks like." Mark hesitated. "It's a town," he finally whispered. "But not a real one. It feels built out of fiction. The roads lead nowhere. The people don't blink. Every shop has something wrong. The clocks all point to 3:17, and everyone here remembers me. But not as Mark." Ethan's throat tightened. "As what?" Mark took a shaky breath. "As the author." It didn't make sense. Until it did. This version of the house. It wasn't just trying to trap people in fear. It was casting them in stories, giving them roles, making them characters in its ongoing myth. "You need to stay awake," Ethan said. "You need to remember who you really are." But the line had already gone dead. No click. No disconnect. Just gone. That night Ethan dreamed of paper. Miles of it. Rolled out across an empty street. Each sheet covered in Mark's handwriting. Stories about houses and shadows and doorways that led to nowhere. But each time Ethan tried to read the words, they changed. His own name began to appear. Then Ava's. Then names he didn't recognize. And at the center of it all was a room with no walls. Just shelves filled with books made of skin. Each one humming. Alive. He woke up screaming. And on the motel nightstand sat something that hadn't been there the night before. A book. Bound in worn leather, slightly damp. No title. He opened it. Blank pages. Until the third one. There, written in handwriting far too familiar, Chapter 1, Ethan returns to the house. The story was already being written, and Ethan had already been cast. Ethan stared at the words until his eyes ached. His breath barely audible over the creaking silence that seemed to settle over the motel like a shroud. Chapter 1, Ethan returns to the house. It wasn't a suggestion. It wasn't some metaphor for grief or looping trauma. It was a command. A line written not by accident, but with intent. And the moment he read it, the world felt smaller. As if reality had been trimmed at the edges to fit inside the book's margins. It wasn't just a line, it was a sentence, and it had already begun reshaping the world to make itself true. He closed the book, but the damage had already been done. The motel room no longer looked right. The shadows were longer than they should have been, stretched at odd angles even in still light. The ticking of the clock on the wall didn't match its second hand. And somewhere, faint but unmistakable, he heard a quill scratching paper. Not in the room, not even in the building, but inside his own head. He stepped outside. The parking lot was empty. Not deserted, emptied. Every car gone, every light off, and yet in the middle of it all stood Iva, her hair wet as if she'd been caught in a rainstorm that never touched the ground. Her eyes met his. "It's begun, hasn't it?" she asked, not blinking. Ethan nodded. "The book, it's writing me into it, and it's using my choices as ink." She walked slowly toward him, her bare feet silent on the pavement. "Then you can't wait, you have to find it. The town. The one Mark described. I don't know where it is." "Yes, you do," she said. "Because the book wants you to find it. It's already laid the path." Ethan's phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. No words, just a pin. A location on the map. Coordinates that pointed to a stretch of highway in the middle of nowhere, flanked by nothing but forest and forgotten towns. He looked at Ava again. "If I follow this, I'm stepping into the story." "You already have," she said. "They left that night. No headlights. No GPS voice. Just the map and the silence, as if the world had agreed to go dim around them. Trees blurred past, black against black, their shapes too still, too watching. After 3 hours, the road changed. Not visually, no sign or gate or broken bridge, but functionally. The engine began to sound wrong. The road dipped when it should have risen. The horizon flickered, like a film reel skipping frames, and then, there it was, the town. It sat at the end of a curve in the road, nestled between hills and fog like it had been tucked into the world, not built. No name, no sign, but streetlights glowed like eyes, and every building was familiar in that unsettling way you recognize things from dreams. Ethan stopped the car. They didn't speak. They got out, and from the center of town a bell rang 3 chimes, then 1, then 7, 3:17 again, always. He knew immediately that this place wasn't just where Mark had been taken. It was where the rewrite was happening. The new myth. The next phase. Carter Hill had fed on pain, Hanover Street on memory. But this one fed on narrative. It swallowed truth and spat back fiction until you believed it. Until you were it. They walked down the main street. Every store had its lights on, yet no one stood behind the counters. Every diner had full plates of food, steam still rising, but no customers, no people. Just the idea of them. Like the town had staged itself. A performance with no audience. Then they saw the post office, and on its wall photos. Dozens of them. Faces Ethan didn't recognize, until he did. Second from the left, middle row. Mark, smiling, wearing clothes Ethan had never seen. Below the photo, local author of the month. Ava reached out and touched it. They made him a resident. Not just that, Ethan whispered. They made him a writer. The door to the post office creaked open. Inside, the air was warm, musty, and in the corner, behind a desk, sat an old typewriter. It was typing on its own, keys hammering out words at a brutal pace. Ethan stepped forward. The paper slid up, revealing the next line, Chapter 2. Ethan arrives in the town of Pale Hollow. He reached out, grabbed the page, yanked it free. The typewriter screamed. A sound not mechanical but human, as if he'd just torn the tongue out of someone who'd been speaking too long. The walls shook, lights flickered, and a voice hissed from the shadows. "You cannot edit me." The entire post office shuddered like a lung trying to collapse inward. And from the back room, Mark stepped out. Alive, breathing, but not right. He wore the smile from his photo. That same distant calm. "Ethan," he said, "you made it. I've been writing you for days." Ethan backed up slowly. "Mark, listen to me. That's not your story. It's using you. You have to fight it." Mark tilted his head. "Why would I fight it? I've never felt more real than I do here." Ava stepped between them, It's feeding off your identity. You're not the author, Mark. You're the draft. And if it finishes writing you, Mark's face twitched, eyes blinking rapidly. I was lost, he said. But now I know who I am. I write the endings. Then he raised a hand, and every typewriter in the room began to click. Not typing, clapping. As if the town was applauding its new favorite son. Ethan took one last look at his brother before grabbing Ava's hand and bolting from the post office. Because this wasn't a rescue. Not yet. This was an edit. And they had just been marked for deletion. They didn't look back. Not because they weren't afraid, but because in this town, looking back meant acknowledging the fiction, giving it space, letting it pull you into the illusion and convince you it was real. Pale Hollow wasn't a place anymore. It was a manuscript, and the words weren't just being written on paper. They were being etched into people, into Mark. That smile he wore, that calmness, it wasn't submission. It was submission. The house hadn't taken his body. It had taken his pen, and now it was rewriting the world through him. Ethan and Ava ran down streets that bent when they shouldn't, past buildings that grew taller the more you ignored them. The sidewalks cracked open and spilled newspaper clippings instead of dust, each one dated tomorrow. And on every page, Ethan's name appeared in headlines: local man, arrested after disturbance at post office. Tragedy at Pale Hollow's edge, visitor declared missing. New fiction star claims, the story isn't over. The narrative was preparing itself. It wasn't just playing with reality. It was scripting it ahead of time. The world was a draft, and Ethan had become a character someone else was trying to overwrite. They ducked into a church at the end of the street. Of course, it wasn't really a church. Not anymore. The pews were filled with mannequins, all dressed in funeral black, heads bowed. Their hands were clasped in prayer, but every palm had teeth. Rows of tiny mouths lined their skin like rosary beads grown from regret. At the altar, a mirror replaced the crucifix, but it didn't reflect, it predicted. Ethan stepped in front of it and saw himself, older, alone, sitting in a chair, hands covered in ink, lips sewn shut with red thread. Behind him, Ava, still young, still watching, still unchanged. Because she hadn't been written yet, she hadn't been allowed. "What is this?" she whispered, stepping beside him. "It's trying to show us the ending," Ethan said, "but it hasn't been finalized." A faint scribble echoed from behind the altar. They found another typewriter, this one older. Rust clung to its keys like mold on a corpse, but the page in it was fresh, still wet. Typed in the same voice that haunted their heads, Chapter 3, the friend becomes the villain. Ethan's hands curled into fists. "They're trying to make you my enemy." Ava's jaw clenched. "Then we write something else." But as she reached for the page, the pews groaned. The mannequins lifted their heads in unison, their mouths stretched open, not to scream, but to speak. A chorus of perfectly synchronized voices whispered, "Conflict creates climax. Climax completes the arc. We must escalate." Then they stood, all of them. Moving as one, they stepped down the aisle. Ethan grabbed Ava, and they bolted through a side door that shouldn't have been there, but was, because the story hadn't finished drawing its walls yet. Outside, the town had changed. Where streets had once led into quaint shops and crooked alleys, now they bled into chapters. Giant pages, flapping like flags across buildings, each one stamped with Mark's voice. They read like rules, instructions, scenes yet to happen. The outsider refuses the truth and is punished. The sister figure betrays the brother at dusk. The town corrects inconsistencies. And beneath them all, repeated again and again like a chorus, everything must serve the narrative. Ava looked at Ethan, her eyes sharper now, older. "It's not just writing us into its story. It's trying to strip away anything that doesn't fit its version of reality." Ethan pointed to the edge of town, where the fog had grown thicker. "That's where the rough draft ends." "How do you know?" "Because I used to write," he said. And when you haven't decided how something ends yet, you just fade it out. They moved toward it. Every step was a fight. The roads beneath them shifted. Lampposts turned into exclamation points. The sky blood ink. Once, a door opened on its own, and a man stepped out wearing Ethan's face. Only it was wrong. Too smooth. Too confident. Like the idealized version of him. The one a storyteller would write if they didn't know the real thing. He smiled, raised a hand, and said, "You should have accepted the role." Ava threw a rock through his chest. It exploded into letters. Black serif font on white mist. They reached the fog. And there, just before it thickened too much to see, stood a house. Not Carter Hill. Not Hanover. This one was simple. White walls. A porch swing that moved slightly in the wrong direction. But every window was covered in paper. Typed pages taped from the inside. Ethan stepped forward. The front door had no handle. Just a single line burned into the wood. Chapter 4, The Brother Returns to the Author. He pressed his palm to it. The door opened like a mouth. The hallway was lined with typewriters, each one facing the wall, each one still typing. Mark sat at the end, his back to them, typing with furious speed, his fingers bleeding, his eyes wide, whispering each word as he wrote it. Ethan walks in. Ava follows. He tries to stop me. I beg him to understand. He doesn't. So he paused. He turned. For the first time, real emotion broke through the mask on his face. "Ethan," he rasped, "I can't stop writing." "You don't have to," Ethan said, stepping closer. "But you don't have to write this. You get to choose." Mark blinked. "But they won't let me finish unless it ends the way they want." "They won't release me." Ethan nodded. "Then we don't end it, not like they want." He reached for one of the pages, ripped it free, and something inside the house snapped. A scream, 1,000 typewriters shrieking, and the walls peeled, not crumbled, peeled. Layers of narrative shedding, revealing a burning white void behind them. The house howled in confusion. Characters began collapsing. Pages burst into flame. And then, stillness. Ethan knelt beside Mark, took his hand. "You're not a character." Mark looked up at him. "I forgot what it felt like," he whispered. "To be real." And from behind them, Iva picked up the last blank page and did something none of them expected. She wrote just one line, in pen. Chapter 5, The Story Writes Itself No Longer. And when she placed it into the nearest typewriter, the machines went quiet, because the story had just ended itself. Not with a twist, not with a scream, but with choice. They didn't know if it was over. That was the most terrifying part, not the screaming house, not the rewriting town, not even Mark's slow unraveling, but the silence that followed. Real silence. Not the humming pause of something waiting to strike, but absolute quiet, like the world was holding its breath after a long scream. The typewriters had stopped. The pages no longer bled from the walls, and Pale Hollow, the town that had never truly been a town, was fading, unraveling at the edges like a forgotten memory. The buildings flickered like old film reels, losing detail with each blink. The diner became a smear of color, the streets just gray lines. The houses flattened like backdrops in a theater where the curtains would never rise again. Ethan stood outside the house where Mark had been kept, watching the sky unthread itself. Clouds turned to smudges. The sun became a light bulb behind parchment. This wasn't just a collapse. It was a reversion. Pale Hollow was returning to whatever half reality it had once occupied. A story with its spine snapped, bleeding into the white space it had crawled out from. And all around them, the last remaining pieces of narrative. Mannequins, whispering fog, looping clocks, twitched once more and then went still. Mark stood beside him, breathing heavily, hands still trembling. His fingers were covered in dried blood and ink, but his eyes were finally his again. Cleamer. Human, tired. "I wasn't just writing the town," he said. "It was writing through me." Ethan nodded. "It was never just the house or the place. It's something deeper. A force that feeds through stories, fear, loops memory, and now, characters. Mark turned slowly, looking over the fading skeleton of Pale Hollow. I think it was trying to live forever. Every new story, every new victim, was a way to keep itself alive. Ava stepped toward them from the edge of the void where the town once met the forest. She held the last page still in her hand, the one she'd written, Chapter 5. The story writes itself no longer. It hadn't burned, hadn't vanished. It remained intact, as if that single line had weight enough to anchor them in reality. There's a cost to ending a story like this, she said quietly. Things that were written into being, they don't always disappear. Some linger, half finished, unwanted. Ethan looked at her. What do you mean? She nodded toward the edge of town. There, standing motionless in the dissolving mist, were the leftovers. People who shouldn't exist. Townsfolk who'd never been born. A child with a blank face, holding a balloon made of stitched skin. An old man stuck mid-laugh, mouth stretched too wide, eyes glassy. A woman whose hands had been replaced by fountain pens, leaking ink down her dress. Each of them half-made, tethered to stories that would never finish. They're trapped, Mark said. Orphans of a broken plot. We can't save them, Ava whispered. They were never real to begin with. But now they're stuck between here and whatever place stories go to die. Ethan stepped forward, hand instinctively moving toward the ribbon in his pocket. Except it wasn't there. Burned long ago. Carter Hill. Another story. Another wound. He lowered his hand. No, he said. We can't save them. But we can keep this from happening again. They left Pale Hollow just as it collapsed entirely. One blink, and the road behind them was forest again. A clearing. No signs of buildings. No paths. No fog. Just trees. And silence. Back in the car. No one spoke. Ava stared out the window. Mark closed his eyes, head resting on the seat. Ethan gripped the wheel like it might suddenly turn on him. Every mile they drove, the sky felt a little heavier, as if the weight of what they'd stopped hadn't vanished. It had simply shifted. That night, they stayed at a gas station off Route 49, not a motel, just a parking lot and a few hours of restless half-sleep in the car. Ava woke first. She tapped Ethan's shoulder gently. There's something in the air, she said. Ethan stepped out of the car and listened. A sound. Distant, familiar. Pages turning. He turned slowly. Across the parking lot stood a billboard that hadn't been there when they arrived. No lights. No wires. Just a blank wooden frame. Until it blinked. Yes, blinked. The surface flickered, then shifted, and there it was. A new message. Typed in the same serif font that had haunted them in Pale Hollow, a new volume begins. Then it faded. Gone, like it had never existed. Ethan stood frozen. This thing, he said slowly, it's not just a story. It's a series. Mark walked up behind him. You think we ended the first one? Ava nodded. We ended the draft. But the author's still out there. They all looked back at the empty billboard, where the shadows stretched too long and the night no longer felt like night. Mark's voice was barely audible. Then what happens next? Ethan stared into the dark. We find the author. It took 3 weeks for the clues to form. 3 weeks of silence, dead ends, and false hope. No hauntings, no time loops, no whispers in motel mirrors. Just the quiet aftermath of Pale Hollow rotting in their minds like leftover ink in dry pens. The billboard had disappeared the next morning. The gas station manager said it'd never been there. That patch of land had been empty for decades. Ethan didn't argue. He just stared at the spot where he knew something had blinked, and something had spoken. Not to his ears, but to the story they were still inside. Mark barely slept, not because of nightmares, because the stories hadn't stopped. Every night, he woke up with new pages written in his head. Not his words, but words channeled through him, like his mind had been hollowed out to serve as a pipe for whatever still clawed at the other end of the story. He filled notebooks, hands shaking, eyes glazed. Ethan read some of it. None of it made sense. It was half gibberish, half genius. Lines that were clearly written by something that didn't fully understand people, but had watched enough of us to fake it. She's looking through mirrors again. She doesn't know she's not the first. There are 4 of them now, but only one breathes air. Do you remember what your blood tastes like when it forgets you? Mark didn't remember writing any of it. Ava suggested burning the pages, but Ethan had a different idea. He started mapping the references, matching patterns. Every time a town was mentioned, Birchfall, Eddystone Crossing, Mercy Glen, he'd search for it. Some didn't exist. Some had been wiped off maps decades ago. But one name kept showing up, Clay Harbor. It wasn't a place they'd ever visited. Nothing about it triggered that electric tension Ethan had grown used to when they approached a haunted location. But it showed up 17 times in Mark's ramblings. Each time, the tone changed. Sometimes it was a warning, sometimes a memory, and once, terrifyingly, it was written like a dedication page. To the one who never stopped writing, Clay Harbor remembers. That's when Ethan knew. This wasn't just another ghost town. This was where it all began. The drive was long, quiet. Clay Harbor was buried in northern woods, a fishing town that had thrived in the 1950s before some industrial accident turned the water black, and the jobs vanished overnight. Now, it was just another corpse along the American backroads, forgotten and unloved, except by whatever fed on forgotten things. As they approached the outskirts, a fog rolled in. But it wasn't normal fog. It moved in rows. Like someone dragging a wet brush over canvas, painting visibility away with purpose. And in that stillness, Ethan felt it again. Not fear, not even dread, but recognition. This was the origin point. They passed the rusted welcome sign. Sile Y Harbor R du Eerster I Spiegien. Half the letters had peeled away, leaving Y Harbor R behind. Like even the name was unraveling. There was no one on the streets. Not even the illusion of people. No mannequins. No shadows in the windows. Just houses with doors ajar, lights flickering like memories fading. This is it, Ava whispered. The last page. No, Ethan said. The first. They found the house at the end of the harbor road. Large. Wooden. Rotten in some places. Pristine in others. As if parts of it had never aged while others had decayed a century. On the porch sat a man. Long beard. Thin frame. Pale skin stretched too tight. He wasn't reading. He was listening. To the wind. To the sky. To them. He looked up as they approached and smiled. I was wondering when you'd get here, he said, voice calm, gentle. Are you the author? Ethan asked. The man chuckled. There's no such thing. Just a vessel. A tool. A hand that keeps moving. I'm not the author. I'm just the first one who couldn't stop. Mark stepped forward. You wrote Pale Hollow. I wrote the framework. The bones. But I never finished it. It kept adding itself. That's how it works, you know. You write one fear, and it wants another. You write one person, and suddenly you have to write their story. Their trauma. Their ending. He looked at Mark. You were just next in line. Ethan was done listening. Then how do we end it? The man's eyes dimmed. You can't. Yes, we can. We did it before. He nodded. You think you did. But that was just one volume. A rough draft sealed. A chapter closed. But this story's older than me. Older than the house. It feeds on storytellers. It is story. And you don't kill a story by fighting it. You kill it by forgetting. Iva looked shaken. That's why it hates silence. That's why it loops and rewrites. It can't stand being forgotten. The man nodded. It's terrified of the quiet. Of fading. Mark stepped forward. So we let it die. No, the old man said. You make it die, one memory at a time. One story erased. You stop reading it. Stop feeding it with fear and focus. He stood, knees cracking. You don't fight it with weapons. You fight it with apathy. That word hit like a bullet. Because it was the opposite of everything they'd been doing. Investigating. Documenting. Retelling. They'd been giving it strength all along. The old man walked past them. He didn't say goodbye. He didn't say anything. He simply left. And then Ethan noticed something. The air around the house was quieter. More still. Like the story inside had paused, waiting to see what they would do. They stepped into the house. No typewriters, no clocks, no flickering mirrors, just a room, and in the center of it, a fire pit. Inside, stacked neatly, books, dozens of them, pages inked in blood and memory. Every haunted house, every loop, every loss. Ava picked one up. It was her, a version of her that died in Hanover, another that vanished in Carter Hill. A dozen iterations of her pain, rewritten over and over. Mark looked at his. It was already blank, already fading. He smiled. "This is how we win." Ethan nodded. They lit the fire, and one by one they forgot the stories, not by accident, but by choice. And as the flames grew, so did the quiet, a silence deeper than fear, stronger than horror, the sound of something ending. The fire wasn't hot, not in the way Ethan expected. It didn't scorch or sear, it peeled. Each book tossed into the pit unraveled slowly, page by page, like a reluctant memory slipping into the dark. The ink didn't burn. It lifted, rose in wisps of black smoke, and threaded upward like fingers scratching their way out. But there was no scream, no flash, no resistance. Just a steady retreat, as if the stories inside knew they'd lost their hold. As if even they were tired. Mark watched as the book bearing his name fell apart. 1 second, it was a weight in his hand. The next, it was dust and regret. A past that could no longer claw back into the present. For the first time in weeks, maybe months, his mind was quiet. The voices stopped scratching at the inside of his skull. The stories no longer wrote themselves behind his eyelids. "Do you feel it?" he asked, voice barely above a whisper. Ethan nodded, like gravity just let go. But Ava was still holding hers. She hadn't tossed it in yet. She stood by the fire, book in hand, frozen. Her fingers dug into the leather cover like it was something alive. It wasn't just about forgetting. For her, this one was personal. Inside this book, she knew, were versions of herself that had died alone, that had never escaped, that had screamed without sound in towns that were never meant to exist. She'd lived all of it, even if she hadn't. Because the story had decided she did. It was a lie, yes, but one made from her own pain, borrowed and multiplied. Ethan stepped beside her. "You don't have to hold on to this." She didn't look at him. "If I throw it away, does that mean it never mattered? It means it doesn't control you anymore." Her eyes were wet. Not from fear, from relief. And as she let go, the book fell into the flames. There was a pulse, not a sound, a feeling, like air being sucked inward. And then the room cracked. Not just the walls or the floor, the reality of it. Hairline fractures ran through the corners of the house, light bleeding from within them like something sacred and unwritten was trying to break free. "Something's happening," Mark said, stepping back. The books were almost all gone now. Just a few left, anonymous ones, drafts, narratives that never found a victim. One of them was titled The Hollow Boy. Another, The Eighth Loop. One had no name at all, just a burned handprint on the cover. And then Ethan saw his. He hadn't expected there to be one, but there it was, bound in green leather, no title, but he knew. Knew the moment he touched it that it contained every choice he'd made since the first night at Carter Hill. Every guilt, every failure, every loop, every scream he'd tried not to make when he was alone. He opened it slowly. The pages weren't blank. They were fading. As if his story was already forgetting itself, he dropped it in. The flame turned blue. The ceiling collapsed in on itself, but not like a house falling, like a curtain lowering. And then the house was gone. No explosion, no wind. Just Ethan, Mark, and Ava standing in the middle of a clearing, surrounded by trees that didn't seem to remember they'd ever been near something cursed. The sun broke through the clouds. Birds chirped. The sky was just the sky. They stood there in silence for a long time. Then Mark spoke slowly. "I can't remember what Carter Hill looked like." Ava nodded. "I can't remember the face of the woman in the mirror house. The one that whispered my name." Ethan stared at the dirt. "I remember that we were scared. But not what scared us. It was working. The stories were dying, not just in the world, but in them. And in their place, stillness, peace. But just as Ethan turned to suggest they leave, Ava froze. Her eyes locked on a tree. Carved into the bark, barely visible under fresh moss, this chapter ends. Below it, a line Ethan hadn't seen in months. 317. His breath caught. "No," Mark muttered. "No, we burned it. We forgot it." But the line beneath 317 was new, fresh. Scratched into the bark like someone had just finished it. Volume 2, prologue begins. The ground rippled beneath them, like a drumbeat under soil. Then, a door, standing in the middle of the woods. A literal door, no frame, no hinges. Just a wooden rectangle standing upright, pulsing. Familiar. Wrong. Ava took a step back. "We're not done." Mark's hands shook. "We killed the story. Why is there a new one?" Ethan walked forward, heart pounding. He didn't touch it. He just looked. On the center of the door, carved as if with fingernails, "You were only the preface." Then the knob turned, and the door opened inward. Inside was not a room, not a house, not a town, just a desk, and a man, wearing black, face hidden, typing, fast. And on the page in front of him, Chapter 1, Ethan steps through the door. The man stopped typing, looked up, and smiled. Not warmly, not cruelly, just patiently. As if he'd been waiting for the story to start all over again. He didn't move. Didn't blink. Didn't even breathe, as far as Ethan could tell. The man behind the desk just sat there, fingers poised above the keys, head slightly tilted, the way someone does when they're studying a character before deciding how to kill them. His smile was fixed, thin and distant. Not joyful, not sinister, just knowing, as if he'd written this exact meeting into existence 100 drafts ago and was now watching the lines fall into place. Ethan didn't step forward. He couldn't. Every part of him screamed not to cross the threshold of that door, not to give the story one more inch. But the man in black was already writing again. His hands moved too quickly. The keys of the old-fashioned typewriter clacking like bones being cracked into shape. And as the words spilled onto the page, the forest around them responded. The trees swayed violently, not from wind, but as if each leaf had just been reminded it was fiction. The dirt under Ethan's feet grew soft, like paper soaked in blood, and somewhere deep in the shadows, a clock began to tick again. Slow, deliberate, each tick landing like a threat. Mark stumbled backward. "Don't go in. Don't acknowledge it. That's how it starts." But Ava stood frozen, eyes fixed on the man behind the desk. "That's not just another story," she said quietly. "That's him. The one behind all of it." Ethan knew she was right. Every haunted town, every looping hour, every whispered phrase, all of it had come from somewhere. And now, here he was. The origin, not a monster or a house or a curse, but a man. A writer. One who had never stopped. "Why us?" Ethan called out. "Why tell our story?" The man didn't look up, but the typewriter answered. "Because your pain was honest." The words hit like a slap. Ethan blinked. Honest? What did that mean? What pain? He'd carried guilt, sure. Regret. But who hadn't? That didn't make him a target. That didn't mean he deserved to be rewritten. He tried again. "What do you want?" Another line appeared. To continue. Always. Iva took a shaky breath. He's not writing for meaning. He's writing for momentum. He doesn't care about the ending. He just wants to keep going. Mark stepped beside her. That's why every time we burn the story, another begins. We're not characters to him. We're tools. The forest trembled harder. Branches snapped in the distance. The sky rippled, as if trying to tear itself open. And then, the man finally stood. It was unnatural. The way he rose, too fluid, too smooth. Like he wasn't standing, but being drawn upward by an invisible pen. His face, still hidden in shadow beneath the wide-brimmed hat, tilted downward. Ethan squinted. No eyes. No nose, no mouth. Just a blank canvas where features should have been, like his identity had been erased to make space for every story he'd ever told. Mark gasped. He has no face, because he has no self. He's just narrative instinct. All creation. No conscience. And then the man spoke, not with a mouth, not with sound, but with words typed into the air. They hovered between them like smoke caught in sunlight. If you don't want to be in the story anymore, write your way out. A page dropped at Ethan's feet. Blank. Waiting. The man stepped back to the desk, placed his hands on the typewriter once more, and began a new chapter. And instantly, the world around them twisted. Trees melted into corridors. Soil turned to carpet. They were no longer in the woods. They were in a house. One Ethan didn't recognize. But it felt familiar. Ava spun in place. "He's rewriting us as we speak!" Mark ran to the nearest wall, pounding his fists. "No windows! No exits! This is a scene!" Ethan stared at the blank page in his hands. His mind raced. If this thing could create worlds through words, then maybe they could, too. Maybe the key wasn't escaping, but writing something stronger. He sat. There was a desk now. Of course there was. The scene wanted him to have one. And a pen. Ava leaned over his shoulder. "What are you going to write?" Ethan didn't answer. He didn't know yet. He looked across the room, through the thin veil of unreality, and saw the man behind the original desk, still typing, a second ahead of everything, like a puppeteer pulling every possible string. Ethan gripped the pen tighter. He wrote one line. The characters realize the author needs them more than they need him. The lights flickered. The man paused. Mark gasped. He felt that. It affected him. Ethan wrote more. They choose their own ending, not one written in fear or loss. One that refuses to give the author what he craves most: continuation. The house shuddered. Ava held Ethan's shoulder. "Keep going. Keep pushing." They break the loop by refusing to play the part. The story dies, not with a bang, but with boredom. The typewriter across the room jammed. The faceless man stood, this time slower, stiffer, less certain. He reached out, not in threat, in desperation. The words appeared, trembling. "Don't go." Ethan stood, tearing the page from the desk. He turned to the others. "It's not a god," he said. "It's not a demon. It's just a writer terrified of the ending. So he keeps us alive so he doesn't die." Ava nodded. "Then let's kill him with silence." Mark walked to the center of the room, and without another word, he closed his eyes. Ava followed. Then Ethan. The world around them began to scream. Pages tore themselves. The house shrieked as walls collapsed into paragraphs. Ink flooded the floor. The faceless man stumbled, grasping at vanishing keys, mouthing soundless protests as his desk splintered beneath him. And then, nothing. Silence. Blackness, not scary, not cold, just empty. The sound of a story no longer being told. Ethan opened his eyes. He was in the back seat of the car. Engine off. Morning sun cutting through the windshield. Ava was beside him. Mark up front, staring out at an empty stretch of road. No fog. No ticking. No towns. No clocks. Just a long road waiting for something new. Mark turned slowly. "Do you think it's over?" Ethan nodded, but he didn't smile. Because deep inside, he knew something terrible. The author might be gone, but someone, somewhere, would eventually find a blank page and start writing again. The days that followed should have felt like freedom. There were no shadows stretching too long in the morning light, no whispers threading their way through phone static, no loops, no pages, no rules. Just time, real, linear, clean. But that's the problem with stories that end. They leave a silence so heavy it starts to rot. Ethan felt it first. A strange emptiness when he woke up. Like he'd forgotten something important, but couldn't quite place what. He would stare at the bathroom mirror for too long, waiting to see something behind him. Nothing ever appeared, but the expectation didn't go away. His fingers would twitch at the thought of typewriters. His heart would beat a little too fast whenever he passed bookstores or blank notebooks stacked near the register at gas stations. The story was gone. They'd watched it collapse. But a part of it had stayed inside them. Mark tried to return to his old life. He even taught a creative writing workshop at a community college, hoping to prove, to himself, more than anyone, that storytelling could be safe again. But his students said strange things. "You always look like you're about to say something, and then stop yourself," one told him. Another turned in a short story titled "The Man Who Dreamed in Loops," and Mark nearly vomited just reading the first page. He never explained why he quit the course. He just packed his things and moved back in with his mother, claiming he needed time to unwind. He barely touched a pen after that. Ava drifted most. She went west, then east, never staying in one place long enough to be remembered. She never told Ethan what she was looking for, or if she was running from anything. But every now and then, she'd call him. Not to talk, just to hear breathing, to know that silence could still be human. And Ethan, he stayed still as a person could be when they no longer trusted the page they were standing on. One morning, he received a package. No return address, just a small manila envelope, brittle like it had been buried for years. Inside was a single page, typed. The font, he knew that font. It hit like a cold hand on the back of the neck. But it wasn't just fear. It was recognition. He didn't want to read it. He almost threw it in the fire. But curiosity, the kind that ruins lives and opens forbidden doors, made him unfold it. It read, Chapter 17, the one who walked away but left the door ajar. There was nothing else. No explanation. No scene. Just the title. A chapter heading. For a story that shouldn't exist. His phone rang 30 seconds later. Ava. Her voice came through the speaker low, shaking. "I got one too," she said. Different title, but same format. "What did it say?" Ethan asked. She hesitated. Chapter 9. The Girl Who Found a Key with No Lock. Mark called them an hour later. His said, Chapter 20. 3. The Ghost Who Forgot He Was Dead. 3 titles. 3 warnings, or invitations, or beginnings. Ethan didn't know which was worse. That night, he didn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table, the page in front of him, and tried to think logically. This didn't have to mean anything. It could be a prank, a coincidence, someone with a twisted sense of humor. But then he noticed something small. At the bottom right corner of the page, so faint it was almost invisible, was a number, a page number, 407, not 1, not 17, as the chapter heading suggested. 407, which meant there were pages before it. Hundreds, maybe thousands. His hands went cold, because suddenly he understood something that chilled his blood more than any haunted town, cursed house, or time loop ever had. They had never escaped the story. They had simply been moved deeper inside it, buried in a later volume. The narrative hadn't ended. It had zoomed out, and now it was calling them again, not with fear, not with monsters, but with something far more terrifying, a new plot. Not a curse, not a haunting, but a story that never stops. He called Ava. "I think we're in the appendix now," he said. She was silent for a long time. Then, "So what do? We find the rest of the pages." She laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was hopeless. "We can't even find the book." Mark called 10 minutes later. "Something's writing us again," he said flatly. "I can feel it. Not like before. It's not pulling the strings. It's observing, watching what we'll do, taking notes." Ethan looked down at the page again. A note had appeared. He hadn't written it. He didn't see it appear, but it was there, in the same serif font. Character development, acceptance of the false ending leads to confrontation with the true author. Not the man with no face. Not the one at the desk, but something higher. Not a villain, not a monster. Just a concept. One they couldn't fight, only acknowledge. Iva whispered it before he could. "The story isn't alive." Ethan nodded slowly. "But it wants to be, and in wanting it watches. It waits. It drops pages like breadcrumbs in the mail. It pretends to sleep so they'll relax. It builds chapters in the background. It grows. Not because it's evil, but because it was abandoned. Maybe the faceless author was right all along. Maybe they were the preface. But now, Now they were in the meat of it. The long arc, and something was coming. Something big enough that the story had started preparing again. Quietly, carefully, building tension, writing suspense, leaving them just enough time to remember what it felt like to be real, because soon they'd be characters again. And this time, they wouldn't know where the pen was coming from, only that it never ran out of ink. The envelope arrived 2 weeks later, this time heavier, thicker, as if it carried weight far beyond paper. Ethan didn't want to touch it, didn't want to acknowledge it, because that was the trick, wasn't it? The story only continued if you played along. It only grew if you turned the page. But as he stared at the envelope on his doorstep, the hair on the back of his neck rose. Not because of fear, but because the porch light had flickered 3 times before he opened the door, just like it had in Pale Hollow, just like the night the clocks stopped. He picked it up. It was warm. Inside wasn't just a page this time. It was a book, small, bound in a skin-like material. No title on the front, no author listed, no barcode, no spine. It pulsed in his hands like it had a heartbeat, as if it had been waiting to be held again. He set it down on the kitchen table and called Ava. No answer. He called Mark. Straight to voicemail. Ethan's fingers hovered over the cover. It was too late, really. The moment he'd taken the envelope inside, he'd already reopened the loop, already become part of the plot again. But he needed to know, needed to see what had changed. The book opened on its own. It didn't flip pages like a normal book. It shivered through them, blurring the words until they landed on one, just one, clean white page. Only a single line was written, "You are the story now." He read it once, twice, and then he realized the page was soft, too soft, because it wasn't paper, it was flesh. A thin, pale stretch of something biological, with the words tattooed into the tissue like they'd been grown rather than written. He shoved the book away, heart hammering. But the moment he did, the house reacted. The lights popped, every bulb snapping at once. The radio turned on by itself, static blaring, then clicking through a dozen dead stations before landing on a voice, his own. He turned away, but the story did not forgive him. Ethan stumbled backward. He hadn't said that, but the voice was identical. And then came the whisper behind the static, a new voice, not human. Something layered, as if spoken through the throats of 1,000 unfinished characters. "We made you. We made you think you were outside us, but you were always a paragraph waiting to be edited." The book closed with a snap. Everything went still. He sat there for hours, the sun rising unnoticed, birds chirping over the cold remains of the night. He didn't touch the book again. But he understood now. The story had never ended because it had learned a new trick. It had evolved. It no longer needed haunted houses or cursed clocks. It needed audience. Readers who forgot they were reading. Characters who believed they'd escaped. People who mistook closure for freedom. He wasn't haunted. He was outlined. Elsewhere, Ava woke in a town she didn't remember driving to. No signs. No people. Just a gas station with no pumps and a motel with no doors. Her phone had no signal, no time, no history. And when she looked into the rearview mirror, she saw herself, but smiling. A smile she hadn't made. A reflection that didn't blink when she did. She left the car running and stepped outside. The motel sign flickered on. "Welcome back, Ava. Chapter 32 awaits," she screamed. No one heard her. Mark sat on a beach, a notebook in his lap, trying to remember how to start a new story. One that wasn't about pain or loops or loss. But the only line he kept writing, over and over again, was one he didn't recognize. He closed his eyes and forgot the sky. Every time he tore the page out, it returned. Rewritten on the next, the ink wouldn't stop. It bled through his hands. He looked up. The sun was wrong. Too still. The ocean too quiet. Then the tide rolled back, not forward, exposing a staircase made of bone and typewriter keys, leading down into darkness. The story was bleeding into the real now. no longer content with pages and chapters. It wanted life, not just to be read, but to be lived. And if you refused, you became a footnote, a discarded plot thread, a lost draft whispering inside someone else's nightmare. Ethan met them both again 2 days later. No messages exchanged, no plans made. They simply showed up at the same bus station in a town that didn't exist on any map. No one asked how. Some instinct deeper than thought had brought them back together. They sat in silence on the bench, the air around them feeling thin, like the world had run out of details, like the page they were walking on had been erased except for their dialogue. Iva finally broke the silence. He's not writing anymore. Ethan looked at her. Then who is? Mark didn't answer. He was staring at the vending machine. Inside, instead of snacks, there were slips of paper behind the glass, each labeled with names. The man who closed the door but left it unlocked. The girl who forgot her ending. The one who burned the author but kept the flame. Character drafts, Mark said, were not finished. A rumble passed beneath their feet. Low, long, familiar. A printer churning to life. A typewriter stretching after a long nap. They didn't speak. They stood. Because they didn't need to say it, the story wasn't trying to trap them anymore. It wanted to be them. And somewhere, in the blank spaces between reality and fiction, the next volume was beginning. Not because they'd failed, but because some stories never wanted to end. They didn't know when they stepped off the bench, or how long they'd been sitting there. The bus never came. The town never filled in. Everything beyond the curb was blank, literally blank, as if the world had run out of ideas and decided not to pretend anymore. Buildings were silhouettes, half-formed and shaking like half-rendered thoughts. Cars passed with no drivers. Street signs flickered with nonsense letters. It wasn't a town, it was a rough draft. A place not meant to be seen, just suggested. But Ethan, Ava, and Mark weren't background characters anymore. They were remembered. And remembered characters were dangerous. They walked in silence, each step echoing too loud, the sound bouncing off unfinished walls and leaking into dialogue bubbles that blinked in and out above their heads. Yes, bubbles. Words they hadn't spoken floating beside them like mistakes on a proofread page. Mark stared at his. He wonders if he's still real. Ava's read she keeps looking for the ending in every shadow. Ethan's was blank. Just an empty bubble. No sentence. No voice. That terrified him the most, because it meant his part hadn't been written yet. They stopped at an intersection that didn't exist. A crosswalk with no lines, where the red light floated midair, dripping ink like blood. Ahead of them stood a figure. Not the faceless author. Not the man at the typewriter. This one looked like Ethan. No, it was Ethan. But not him now. Him before. Before Pale Hollow. Before Carter Hill. Before the stories took hold and twisted his memories into metaphors. The younger Ethan smiled. His skin looked fresh. Hair not yet matted by fear. Eyes wide with possibility. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. Instead, a title card flickered above his head like an old movie frame version 1.0, the protagonist before the plot. Ethan stepped forward slowly. Why am I seeing this? The other Ethan tilted his head. Behind him, 2 more figures appeared. Ava, but younger, smiling, carefree, without the weight of dead towns behind her eyes. And Mark, still cocky and loud, sleeves rolled up like he was always ready to start something. They stood in a line, like characters on a cover page. Drafts, Ava whispered beside Ethan. We're looking at our original versions. Mark narrowed his eyes. Then why are they here? That's when the scene began to shift. The figures turned, walked away, and the world bent with them. The intersection stretched, pulled, and before the trio could move, they were inside something else. A new setting. A classroom. Rows of empty chairs. A chalkboard that wrote itself in reverse. Lesson 1 characters are only real when they disobey. The door slammed shut behind them. No lock, no handle. Just gone. Ethan backed into a desk. This is how it starts. Another story. Ava knelt beside a pile of papers on the floor, pages torn from journals. Each one had only a single line. They blinked, and a year vanished. She screamed, but the echo hadn't been invented yet. He finally remembered who he was, and it killed him. Mark grabbed one. This one's dated next week. Ava's eyes locked on the chalkboard. These aren't stories. They're traps. Phrases designed to loop us again. Then, from above them, the loudspeaker crackled to life. No static this time. Just a voice, flat, calm, familiar. Not the faceless man, not the unseen author, but Ethan's own voice. Welcome back to the exposition. You left a thread dangling. They ran no plan, just away. But the halls didn't end. They twisted, folded, chalkboard after chalkboard, each with phrases more broken than the last. Plot twist, they never left. They just paused. Foreshadowing is a polite way of saying, you'll regret this later. The character you just killed wasn't a character. He was you. Ethan's breath caught. It wasn't just a story trying to trap them. It was a story trying to explain itself. Trying to be clever. Trying to be self-aware. Ava gripped his arm. Ethan, look! They entered a gymnasium. Empty, except for one thing. A mirror. Huge, floor to ceiling. And in it, they weren't alone. Their reflections were moving differently, not mirroring. Acting on their own. The other Ethan stepped forward first, smiling, eyes sharp with malice. Then the other Ava. Then the other Mark, not copies. Not shadows. Not ghosts. Interpretations. Twisted versions of who they used to be. Of who the story thought they should become. The other Ethan tilted his head and mouthed a word rewrite. Ava reached for her reflection. The glass didn't stop her. Her hand passed through, and then it pulled her in. Mark screamed, diving after her. Gone. Both gone. Ethan stood alone, the reflection of himself still waiting, smiling, typing, not on a keyboard, but on Ethan's own bones, as if his ribs were keys, as if every breath wrote a new sentence. He turned to run, but the world shattered. Not exploded, not vanished, shattered. Like a pane of glass hit by a scream, he tumbled into blackness, pages flying around him like birds, ink streaking across his arms. Voices whispered Chapter 30, 1 the dialogue that wrote itself. Chapter 30, 2 he forgot what ending he wanted. Chapter 30, 3 the story took its mask off. Then silence. Then a heartbeat, and Ethan opened his eyes. He was in a room, one he hadn't seen before. No windows, no doors. Just walls made of books, each with a spine, except his. His book sat in the center, open. But the spine was broken. Literally snapped, like something had tried to bend the story the wrong way. He picked it up. Inside was a sentence, welcome to the prologue of the sequel. Ethan laughed, not because it was funny, but because the story had never needed him to understand. It just needed him to keep reading, and he would. Because he had no choice anymore. He was the book with no spine, and the story wasn't over, it was beginning again. Ethan didn't remember falling asleep. One moment, he was holding the book with no spine, and the next, he was waking up on a floor made of shredded paper. Each fragment bearing sentences, paragraphs, names. Some of them he recognized. Some he wished he didn't. There was Ava's name. Scrawled across a torn headline, local girl found screaming in motel room with no mirrors. Mark's face sketched on a napkin beneath the words. The supporting character who never knew he was the twist. He tried to stand, but the ground buckled under his weight. The pages shifted and hissed, like snakes whispering secrets too old to forget. This wasn't a room. It was a library graveyard, filled not with finished books, but with stories that had been erased. Something was different now. There was no narrator, no voice overhead, no chalkboard teaching cryptic lessons. Just silence, thick and watchful. He was deep now. So deep into the story, even the plot had forgotten it was still being told. He moved forward, the paper floor crinkling beneath his steps. Every few feet, he passed a pedestal. Each one held a single object, a lighter, a cracked glasses lens, a doorknob, a watch with no hands. Ethan realized They were all props from the story's previous loops. Tools the narrative had once used to manipulate their reality. Relics of arcs abandoned. He picked up the watch. The moment he touched it, time restarted. Not his, not the world's, but the story's. A voice hissed behind his ear, thin and trembling, like it hadn't been used in centuries. You're walking through the footnotes now. He spun. No one. This is where the deleted scenes go to scream. Ethan clutched the watch tight. Its hands twitched for the first time, pointing not to numbers, but to chapters. Chapter 1, Chapter 17, Chapter 403. The final hand pointed to one marked Epilogue Draft Rejected. He followed the direction the hand pointed. The deeper he went, the more grotesque the library became. Books with mouths sewn shut, pages stitched together with hair, a spine, a literal one, nailed to a wall, each vertebra labeled with an act number. The air smelled like old paper and forgotten apologies. Somewhere in the distance, something was reading aloud. But not like a person, more like a chorus of discarded narrators. Their tones conflicted, some poetic, some clinical, some desperate. And every voice was telling the same story, but in completely different ways. Ethan passed an open book on the ground. It was filled with blacked-out text, redacted so heavily only one phrase remained: she was supposed to die here. He didn't know who she was. He didn't want to. He picked up his pace. Eventually, the library thinned. And then, he saw her. Ava. Not the Ava he'd last seen in the mirror. Not the Ava who had screamed outside the motel, but a version of her sitting at a long table, surrounded by dozens of copies of herself. Every Ava wore a different outfit. One was bloodied. One was smiling. One had no eyes. One was reading a book titled Why She Always Escapes. They looked up in perfect unison as Ethan approached. The real one, his Ava, stood. You made it. He didn't speak. He couldn't. Seeing her standing there among all those failed versions cracked something in him. It wasn't relief. It was horror at how many ways she'd been rewritten. How long have you been here? She shrugged. Hard to tell. Time loops backward here. I remember things I haven't done yet. He moved closer. Where's Mark? Ava lowered her head. That was answer enough. Ethan turned to look at the table. In the center lay a page. One word written on it. Erased, he closed his eyes. No. He fought the narrative, she said softly. Refused to become what it needed. It deleted him. But we're still here. She nodded. Because we still believe we're real. That's our edge. Our only edge. Behind them, a soft clicking began. Like a typewriter, but slower, more deliberate. They turned. At the far end of the library stood a desk. Not the same one as before. This one was carved from stone, its surface covered in moving text that rewrote itself every second, and seated behind it was Ava, another one. Older, eyes sunken, smile crooked with knowledge too vast to carry. She didn't type, she edited. Red lines moved across her arms, corrections etched into her skin. She's the editor, Ava whispered. The one who shapes the story after it's been told. The real power. Ethan stepped forward. I want out. The editor didn't blink. She simply gestured to the table behind them. All the versions of Ava were gone. Only their chairs remained, and Ethan realized what the editor had done. She had consolidated them, pulled all the branches into one timeline. His Ava, the last standing draft. You were rewritten too, the editor said finally. Her voice was Ava's, but hollowed out, like it had been passed down through generations of ink. So many versions of you ended, but the one who questions, the one who doubts the most, you always survive. Because the story needs resistance. It feeds off almost losing you. Ethan shook his head. Then I'll give it nothing. No, she smiled. You'll give it everything. Because the story's not about survival anymore. It's about legacy. Behind them, a door appeared. No handle. No hinges. Just a frame of light. Ava stepped toward it. What happens if we walk through? The editor shrugged. Maybe you end the story. Maybe you become it. Ethan looked at her one last time. The red ink on her arms was bleeding. From one phrase. Don't write your ending. Levitt. He took Ava's hand, and together they walked through the door. Not because they trusted it, but because they refused to let someone else write their final sentence. And as they vanished into light, a single blank page fluttered down behind them, waiting, watching, ready. It began with a heartbeat, but not Ethan's, not Ava's. The heartbeat belonged to the story. Somewhere beyond the light they'd stepped into, the world throbbed like something vast and ancient had just realized it wasn't alone anymore. Not a world made of logic or shape, but something raw and fluid, an unfinished thought struggling to become a sentence. They were floating now, or falling. It was impossible to tell. There was no sky, no ground, just movement, like being pulled along by the idea of momentum. Ethan tried to speak but found no air in his lungs. Not because he couldn't breathe, but because breathing hadn't been written in yet. Ava clutched his hand tighter. Her lips didn't move, but he still heard her voice, not through sound, but through meaning. This is the place before the prologue. That's when the shapes started to form. Letters at first, loose, glowing runes that shimmered and hissed around them. Then the letters became words, drifting like jellyfish through the void. Loss, truth, loop, escape. Ethan reached out to touch one. The moment his fingers brushed it, the words shattered into sentences, then paragraphs, then scenes, snippets of his own life, rewritten and folded over themselves. He saw himself in high school, standing on the edge of a cliff. Only this version never stepped back. He saw Ava sitting alone in a library, her reflection watching her from every mirror. He saw Mark, alive, smiling, being erased stroke by stroke until only his name remained, a dangling modifier in a sentence with no subject. The world was showing them what it could have been, what it tried to be. But most of all, it was begging them to see something this chapter they were in. It wasn't supposed to exist. It was an accident. A leak in the structure. A pocket between plot points where characters weren't confined by arcs or themes. Where they could choose. And that terrified the story. They landed suddenly, if landing was even the right word. One moment, they were drifting through void grammar, and the next, their feet touched something firm. Not ground, just certainty. They were standing on a platform suspended in nothing. Above them hung an outline of a book, massive and hollow, like the skeletal remains of a god's first draft. A voice whispered, not spoken, not external, but from within Ethan. Every book has a forbidden page. He blinked. What? The platform beneath them began to shift. In the center, a pedestal rose, and on it sat a single page, blank except for one word at the top, read a tud. Ava stepped closer. This is the chapter the story deleted. Ethan felt it then, deep in his bones. Not fear, not even wonder, recognition. This was his chapter. The one he'd never lived. The one the original story, whatever intelligence had created this entire ordeal, had snuffed out before it could breathe. What happens if we read it? Ava asked. Nothing, he said, and everything. They looked at each other. And read. The page filled itself line by line. Not in ink, but in memory. Not past, not future, just what should have been. It told of a life untouched by the loops. A version of Ethan who had never lost Mark, never walked into Pale Hollow, never heard a typewriter scream. A version of Ava who'd gone to college, fallen in love, laughed without looking over her shoulder. They were real, simple, alive. But the final line turned everything, and they never knew what it cost to live without fear. Ethan stepped back. Ava stared at the last sentence. It wasn't a comfort. It was a warning. Because as much as they hated the horror, as much as they despised the rewrites and the riddles and the endless chase, it had made them aware. It had woken them up. To the fragile, bloody truth behind every character, you are only real when you know you could be deleted. The page dissolved. The platform began to shake. Above them, the hollow book snapped shut, like a mouth sealing a secret. A door appeared, the same kind as before. But this one, blood, Lines of red ink trickled down its frame, as if the story itself was bleeding from the effort of letting this moment exist. Ethan and Ava stood still. Neither moved, because they knew this was the real ending, not the last scene, but the choice they could walk through, return, be rewritten again, or they could stay. Here, in the place that shouldn't exist, and let the story starve. Ava reached out, touched the bleeding door. Her hand came back red. "This is it," she whispered. "If we go through, we give it power again." Ethan looked at the void behind them, then at her, then at the door. He reached into his pocket, pulled out the spine-less book, and for the first time since he'd received it, he opened it with intent. Inside, the pages were blank, but he began to write. Not with ink, not with words, but with refusal. He didn't write an ending. He didn't write a twist. He didn't write a sequel. He simply stopped, closed the book, and dropped it to the floor. The moment it touched the platform, the entire world groaned. Like something old had been denied its final breath. The door crumbled. The book burst into flames. The platform cracked. Ava smiled. "I think we just ended it." Ethan didn't reply. He just closed his eyes, waiting for the collapse. But it never came. Only light. Warm, gentle. The kind that doesn't blind. The kind that says you did enough. And in that moment, the story finally stopped reading itself. The ink dried, the pages closed, and somewhere, in the quietest corner of a forgotten draft, a character exhaled. There was no music, no crescendo, no fade to black, just stillness. Ethan opened his eyes, and, for the first time in what felt like eternity, the world didn't shift beneath him. The air didn't hum with hidden narration. No voice echoed from above. There was no title card blinking into existence, no glitch in the sky, no metaphors hovering in the corner of his vision. Just silence. Not the threatening kind, the kind that holds its breath before something awful. This was earned silence. Final, solid, like a book closed without being thrown. He looked around. He was sitting in a field. Grass tickled his fingers. A breeze moved across his skin, not scripted or symbolic, just wind. The sky overhead was cracked with gold, the sun rising without drama. No messages in the clouds. No plot etched in the bark of trees. The world didn't seem to care who he was. And that was the point. He wasn't a protagonist anymore. He was a person. Ava sat beside him, legs crossed, face turned up toward the sky. She hadn't said a word since the platform, since the book burned, since the door, bleeding and hungry, crumbled into dust. She didn't need to speak. Neither of them did. They had stood at the edge of fiction and refused to leap. Ethan broke the silence first. "Do you think it's really over?" Ava nodded slowly. "I don't hear it anymore. The story," she shook her head. "Us." And she was right. For so long, they had moved like lines in a screenplay. Every step, every pause, every decision felt narrated, pushed, shaped. Even their silence had often been written. But now they were choosing to sit, to breathe, to speak or not. There was no script anymore. No loop. No faceless author tapping the keys behind the curtain. Ethan turned his hand over in the sunlight, studying the tiny scar on his palm, a remnant from part 19. The barbed wire that looped back through the diner in Carter Hill. For a second, he waited for it to vanish, for the mark to fade like a reset had occurred. It didn't. The pain, the past, it was all still real. But it no longer defined him. They were out. Not because they broke the story, but because they refused to play it. Behind them, far off beyond the hills, the library graveyard still stood. Barely. The skeletal book that once loomed in the void now lay open on the earth, cracked down the middle, its pages blank. Birds fluttered through its ribs like it was just another ruin. Another myth left to rot. Mark never reappeared. He hadn't crossed into the impossible chapter with them. But maybe that was his escape. Maybe deletion, in the end, was freedom for him. Ethan hoped so. He wouldn't forget him. He wouldn't forget any of it. But remembering no longer meant being chained. It meant choice. That afternoon, They walked to a road that stretched out into a real horizon. It wasn't dusty with symbolism or warped by metaphor. It was asphalt, cracked with age, lined with fading white paint. A sign stood crooked in the dirt nearby. It read, "Welcome to Chapter Nothing." Ava laughed when she saw it. "What now?" she asked. Ethan smiled. "Whatever we want." And as they walked forward side by side, something beautiful happened. Nothing, no twist, no echo of a typewriter, no riddle in the distance, no whispered voice saying to be continued, just silence. Real, honest silence. The kind you get when a story ends well. Not clean, not perfect, but true. You see, the scariest thing was never the loop, never the haunted town, not even the idea of being erased. The scariest thing was that we'd forget we were being written. But Ethan remembered now. He remembered the weight of being someone else's creation, and the power of choosing not to be. At the edge of the road, Ava stopped and looked back one last time. The fields behind them shimmered with fading words, phantoms of stories that had tried to own them. She raised a middle finger toward the sky. "No more plot twists," she said. "We write nothing from here on out." Ethan laughed, and the sound, free, untethered, was the truest ending of all. Because the story had given them 1,000 chances to break, 100 more to surrender. It had rewritten them, looped them, erased them, begged them, and they still walked away. Together, so when people ask how the story ended, they'll hear all kinds of things. Some will say Ethan burned the last page. Others will say Ava was the author all along. A few might claim they never escaped, that they became myths, folded into some dusty anthology of characters who disobeyed. But the truth is simpler. The story ended when you stopped reading.